The world was silent as Elon Musk stood at the podium, his gaze sweeping across the packed auditorium. The room was filled with journalists, scientists, engineers, and global leaders, all waiting for him to speak. It was 2025, and Musk had called this press conference to announce the next phase of SpaceX's ambitious plan to send humans to Mars. Yet, instead of diving into the specifics of rockets or technologies, Musk started with a question. What will the future look like when humanity is no longer confined to Earth? There was an audible shift in the air, a collective intake of breath from the audience. Some leaned forward, eager to hear more. Others exchanged skeptical glances, as though unsure of what to make of this bold question. To many, the idea of sending humans to Mars still seemed like an impossible dream, something straight out of science fiction. Musk, undeterred by the mixed reactions, continued. This is not just about reaching Mars. This is about the survival of our species. Earth is beautiful, but it's fragile. There's a growing number of threats: climate change, pandemics, asteroid impacts, and even the potential for human conflict, that could endanger our future. The question is not whether we can make life on Mars possible, but whether we are willing to take the risk to ensure that humanity has a future beyond this planet. As his words settled into the room, the weight of what he was saying began to sink in. Musk wasn't just speaking about Mars as a scientific achievement, he was framing it as a matter of existential importance. The goal was not just to explore but to establish a new home for humanity, a place to ensure that we could survive long after Earth's resources had been exhausted or its environment rendered uninhabitable. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Musk added, catching the attention of millions watching the live stream. Because what I'm talking about here, it's a challenge. It's a risk. But it's one that we cannot afford to ignore. The room buzzed with excitement and uncertainty. Some were mesmerized by Musk's vision, others found themselves grappling with the daunting reality of what he was proposing. Could humanity really colonize Mars? Was it even possible? Before anyone could respond, Musk shifted gears. We've already made the first step. SpaceX has successfully landed rockets back on Earth. We've sent unmanned missions to Mars, gathering invaluable data. Now, we are ready for the next phase. A crewed mission. And this is where things get real. A few seconds of silence passed, then a murmur spread across the room. Questions began to fly, one after the other. How soon? How much will it cost? What are the risks? But Musk wasn't finished. He looked around the room, his eyes locking with those of the reporters and officials, as though daring them to challenge him. Imagine this, he said, his voice lowering slightly, what would happen if we don't try? If we remain complacent, comfortable in our little bubble on Earth, while the universe waits for us to catch up? What will the future hold if we fail to take this chance? How will history remember us? The question hung in the air, almost like a challenge. It wasn't just about Mars anymore. It was about humanity's legacy, about pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Elon Musk had always been a man who thrived on the impossible, who saw obstacles as opportunities. But today, he was asking everyone, whether they were a scientist, a politician, or an everyday person, whether they believed in the dream he had set before them. And that's when the press conference took a different turn. A reporter stood up, a young woman with dark hair and an inquisitive look in her eyes. Mr. Musk, I think what you're saying is incredible, but also, terrifying. What happens if the mission fails? What happens if you send people to Mars, and they never come back? Musk paused, letting the weight of her question sit with the room for a moment. The eyes of every person in the room were on him now, waiting for a response. The silence felt heavy, as though the answer to that question could determine the fate of everything. I think, Musk said slowly, his gaze steady, the real question is not whether failure is possible, it's whether we are willing to let fear stop us from taking the next step. Because if we don't, humanity might never have the chance to leave Earth. And would be the real tragedy. There was a ripple of murmurs through the room. Some were still doubtful, while others were caught in the grip of his conviction. Musk's answer wasn't just pragmatic, it was emotional. He wasn't just selling Mars, he was selling a vision of survival, of progress, of hope. As the press conference continued, the question of whether or not humanity could reach Mars began to fade into the background. What remained at the forefront was something much more profound: should we? And for the first time, the conversation wasn't about technology or logistics, it was about humanity's purpose, its future, and its very survival. "Now, let me tell you what we're doing next," Musk said, breaking the tension. SpaceX is on track to launch the first crewed mission to Mars in the next 2 years. This mission will mark the beginning of humanity's expansion beyond Earth. The first colony will be established, and the dream of life on Mars will no longer be a dream. It will be a reality. He paused, letting the words sink in, knowing that the magnitude of this announcement would echo across the world. "The future begins now," he concluded, his voice filled with resolve. As the crowd erupted into applause, Musk's mind was already on the next step. For him, there was no turning back. This mission was no longer just a goal, it was a calling. And as he looked out at the faces in the crowd, he couldn't help but wonder, what if we succeed? What would the world look like when humanity finally took its place among the stars? The road to Mars had just begun, and the journey ahead would be anything but easy. But Elon Musk was ready. And whether the world was ready or not, he had already taken the first step. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk wasn't born into the world with a silver spoon in his mouth. His early life was far from the luxury most people associated with billionaires. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, he was the son of a Canadian mother, May Musk, a dietitian and model, and a South African father, Errol Musk, an electromechanical engineer. Though his parents were highly intelligent and well-educated, their relationship was rocky, and Musk's childhood was a lonely one. He would later describe his early years as difficult, marked by bullying at school and a strained relationship with his father. Yet, it was in those challenging years that his intense curiosity about the world began to take root. Growing up, Musk had an insatiable thirst for knowledge. At the age of 12, he taught himself computer programming and created a video game called Blaster, which he sold for $500. It was a small success, but it revealed something deeper about Musk's mindset, his ability to dream big and execute his ideas, even at a young age. Musk's academic journey was a reflection of his desire to push the boundaries of what was possible. After moving to Canada at 17 to attend Queen's University, he later transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned degrees in both economics and physics. Musk's ambition wasn't merely to succeed in business, it was to change the world. But what was driving him to take on such colossal ventures? The answer, according to those close to him, was a deep sense of urgency, a belief that the fate of humanity was in peril, and that the only way to ensure its survival was to take risks no one else was willing to take. This was no ordinary businessman, this was a man who saw the world as a broken machine, desperately in need of repair, and who was determined to fix it, no matter the cost. After college, Musk moved to California, where his first big entrepreneurial breakthrough came. In 1995, he co-founded Zip2, a company that provided business directories and maps for newspapers. It wasn't long before Compaq acquired Zip2 for nearly $300 million, and Musk walked away with a cool $22 million. But instead of taking the money and relaxing, Musk reinvested that fortune into a new venture, X.com, an online payment company that would eventually become PayPal. PayPal's success catapulted Musk into the tech world's elite, but Musk's ambitions had already outgrown the boundaries of e-commerce. In 2002, PayPal was sold to eBay for $1.5 billion, and Musk found himself with a massive fortune, $165 million. Most people would have been content to rest on their laurels, but Musk had something far more extraordinary in mind. The success of PayPal had opened a door, but it was the vast expanse of space that truly captured his imagination. It was in the early 2000s, after selling PayPal, that Musk turned his attention to space. He had always been fascinated by the stars, and like many of the great visionaries before him, he believed that space exploration was key to humanity's future. But while other billionaires might have written a check to NASA or donated to existing space ventures, Musk wanted to do something more audacious. He wanted to build a private company that could make space travel affordable, efficient, and sustainable. In 2002, Musk founded SpaceX with the lofty goal of revolutionizing space exploration. The mission was simple but audacious: to make space travel more affordable, and ultimately, to colonize Mars. The company started with humble beginnings, working from a tiny office in El Segundo, California. It was a time of massive risk, but Musk believed that space exploration was the only way to ensure humanity's long-term survival. Musk's venture into space was initially met with skepticism. Many believed that private companies couldn't possibly compete with NASA, whose space program had been the hallmark of American space exploration for decades. But Musk wasn't deterred. He had seen the successes of his previous ventures and believed that space was the next frontier. There was a real sense of urgency driving him. He wasn't just building rockets, he was building humanity's future. Musk's vision for Mars was grandiose. He saw the colonization of Mars as the ultimate solution to the dangers facing humanity, whether it was the climate crisis, the potential for future wars, or even a catastrophic event like an asteroid strike. Musk wasn't just thinking about the next few years, he was thinking about the next few centuries. For him, Mars represented a backup plan, a second chance for humanity to thrive beyond the confines of Earth. But space exploration, as Musk quickly learned, was no easy feat. His early days at SpaceX were marked by failure after failure. The company's first 3 rocket launches ended in disaster. The world was watching closely, waiting for Musk to admit defeat. Many critics called him naive for even attempting such a venture. But Musk, ever the optimist, pressed on. By 2008, SpaceX's 4th attempt to launch the Falcon 1 rocket into orbit was a make-or-break moment for the company. Musk was on the brink of bankruptcy and had to make a decision. Should he cut his losses and walk away, or should he risk everything on one final attempt? He chose to continue. And against all odds, Falcon 1 succeeded. That launch, which placed a small satellite into orbit, marked the beginning of a new era in space exploration. In the years that followed, SpaceX would achieve the impossible: reusable rockets, the first privately funded spacecraft to dock with the International Space Station, and ultimately, the design of the spacecraft that would carry astronauts to Mars. Yet, despite these achievements, Musk's journey was far from over. The path to Mars would be fraught with even greater challenges. There would be setbacks, technological hurdles, and the looming question of whether humanity was truly ready to take this giant leap. Musk, however, remained steadfast. His unyielding belief in the necessity of a multiplanetary species, coupled with his ability to attract top-tier talent and his willingness to pour his own wealth into the cause, had propelled SpaceX forward. But Mars was still a distant goal, one that would require more than just rockets. It would demand a full-scale effort, one that involved the best minds on Earth and a level of innovation never before seen in human history. And so, with the success of SpaceX's Falcon rockets and a clear path ahead, Musk turned his attention to the most ambitious venture of all, the colonization of Mars. But there was still much to be done. Technology had to be perfected. Habitats had to be built. And, above all, a new generation of explorers had to be trained. But if anyone could pull it off, it was Elon Musk. His vision was grand, his ambition was limitless, and his drive was unparalleled. Musk wasn't just dreaming about Mars, he was determined to make it happen. For him, the future wasn't something to be feared. It was something to be created. Elon Musk had always been a man of big ideas, but none were as ambitious or as perilous as the idea of colonizing Mars. It wasn't just about building rockets or sending satellites into space, this was about transforming human destiny. The dream of Mars had always been present in Musk's mind, but as SpaceX's achievements mounted, it became clear that the task ahead was much more complicated than anyone had initially thought. And with complexity came conflict. In 2012, SpaceX achieved a monumental breakthrough. The first privately funded spacecraft, Dragon, successfully docked with the International Space Station, ISS. This was a huge leap for Musk and his company, proving that private companies could do what only governmental space agencies had been able to do for decades. It was a proud moment, but as much as Musk celebrated the success, he knew it was only a small part of the larger mission. Sending cargo to the ISS was impressive, but sending humans to Mars? That was a different ball game. Mars was a cold, hostile, and barren world. Even the thought of putting humans on the red planet seemed absurd to most of the scientific community. Musk's ambition, however, had always been to see the impossible become possible. But as the scale of the Mars mission grew clearer, so did the risks, and they were bigger than anyone could have predicted. The first major challenge was technology. The Falcon 9 rockets, which had already proven their reusability, weren't capable of carrying the massive payloads necessary to launch humans into deep space. SpaceX would need an entirely new kind of spacecraft. That led to the creation of the Starship, a massive, reusable spacecraft designed for deep space exploration, capable of carrying large crews and all the necessary supplies to survive on Mars. But even the development of the Starship wasn't without its hurdles. The first few prototypes of Starship, built in SpaceX's testing facilities in Boca Chica, Texas, failed spectacularly. The early prototypes exploded on the launch pad or in midair. Some crashes were spectacularly public, broadcast to millions of viewers who were waiting to see if SpaceX would succeed or fail. Elon Musk, the mastermind behind it all, watched each failure with intense scrutiny, knowing that every failed test was a step closer to success, but also a reminder of the risks involved. Public opinion began to waver. Some critics argued that Musk was too ambitious, that he was willing to gamble with human lives in pursuit of a dream that might never be realized. Even within the company, there were murmurs of doubt. Employees at SpaceX were accustomed to challenges, but the Mars mission was like nothing they had ever faced. There were days when it seemed like the project was doomed to fail before it had even begun. The more SpaceX pushed the boundaries, the more resistance they faced. The media began to question Musk's judgment. Columnists wondered if SpaceX was biting off more than it could chew. Some wondered if it was all just a publicity stunt. Was Musk chasing glory, or was he truly trying to save humanity? And most importantly, could the mission ever succeed? Musk's response to the growing doubts was always the same: perseverance. Failure is an option here, he said. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. His confidence remained unshaken, but even Musk could not ignore the mounting pressure. The public and his critics were becoming more vocal, and within SpaceX itself, a growing sense of urgency permeated the air. But while SpaceX faced mounting difficulties, a much bigger conflict loomed on the horizon: political and financial obstacles. The Mars mission was not only a technological challenge but a political one. Space exploration, especially with a goal as ambitious as Mars colonization, required government support, both in terms of funding and policy. Musk had long been a critic of government bureaucracy, often pushing for private enterprise to take the lead in space. Yet, as the Mars mission began to take shape, he realized that no matter how capable SpaceX was, they couldn't do it alone. NASA, the European Space Agency, and other space agencies around the world were critical players in the race to Mars. But Musk's vision of private companies leading space exploration often clashed with the more traditional, governmental approach. There were disagreements about funding, timelines, and, most importantly, the question of who would control the new frontier. Could Musk convince the international space community to embrace his vision, or would he face constant pushback? NASA had always been the face of American space exploration, and Musk knew that despite his accomplishments, SpaceX was still a newcomer to the scene. He would need allies, many of them, to move forward. But convincing the likes of NASA and other governments to invest in his vision of Mars colonization was a monumental challenge in itself. The idea of private companies controlling space exploration was still a controversial and divisive issue. Would governments allow private companies to take the lead in shaping humanity's future off-world? And then there was the financial strain. Colonizing Mars wasn't just about rockets and spacecraft, it was about building a self-sustaining colony on a planet that was hostile to human life. Musk estimated that the cost of building a Mars base could run into the tens of billions of dollars. While SpaceX had become incredibly successful, the funding required to make the Mars dream a reality far exceeded anything the company had raised before. To complicate matters, Musk had spent a significant portion of his fortune on SpaceX's development. Many questioned whether he was willing to risk even more of his personal wealth, especially given that the mission had no guaranteed success. Could Musk's dream survive the weight of financial pressure? Despite these growing conflicts, Musk was undeterred. Every obstacle he encountered only fueled his determination. There were no guarantees in life, but if he didn't pursue the Mars mission, who would? As the technical, political, and financial challenges grew more intense, Musk remained resolute. He believed in the mission not just for SpaceX, not just for the billions of dollars invested, but for the future of humanity. But he knew that if he was to succeed, he would need more than just technology, he would need people who shared his vision, people willing to push past the boundaries of what had ever been thought possible. The road to Mars was no longer just a technological endeavor. It had become a battle on multiple fronts, a battle for funding, for political support, and for the hearts and minds of the public. Musk wasn't just trying to put people on Mars, he was trying to change the course of human history. And with every challenge, he took one more step closer to achieving his dream. But at what cost? As Elon Musk's vision for Mars moved from a far-off dream to a tangible, unfolding reality, the battle for survival on the red planet grew more urgent than ever. The challenges SpaceX faced were no longer just about technological failure or political opposition, they were now about the very survival of the mission. With each passing day, the scale of the journey became clearer, and the stakes grew impossibly high. The first major milestone in the quest to colonize Mars was the successful launch of the Starship prototype, a massive, fully reusable spacecraft designed for deep space travel. Starship was a marvel of engineering, unlike anything that had ever been conceived before. It was capable of carrying dozens of crew members, along with the essential supplies for a mission to Mars. And unlike its predecessors, Starship was designed to be fully reusable, dramatically reducing the cost of space travel. The world watched eagerly as the first Starship test flight was set for launch. It wasn't just a test of the spacecraft's capabilities, it was a demonstration of Musk's unrelenting drive. The sheer audacity of the mission had inspired awe, but now, the stakes were personal. Musk had placed everything on the line, his fortune, his reputation, and the future of humanity. But even in the face of such monumental risks, Musk knew that failure was a necessary part of the process. It was only through failure that innovation could flourish. The problem was, the failure of Starship meant the failure of Mars. The launch took place in Boca Chica, Texas, in front of an eager crowd of engineers, journalists, and spectators. The rocket launched with a powerful roar, soaring toward the sky. For a moment, it seemed like everything was going according to plan. But as the rocket reached higher altitudes, something went wrong. The massive Starship began to tilt dangerously off course. The crowd held its breath. Musk stood, silent, watching intently, fully aware that this failure would once again test SpaceX's resolve. The rocket continued its trajectory, but moments later, it exploded in a flash of fire and smoke. The entire test was a failure, another setback for SpaceX, another massive blow to Musk's dream of reaching Mars. The crowd was silent. But Musk, as always, was resolute. It was only in the face of such failure that the seeds of innovation would take root. In the aftermath of the explosion, SpaceX engineers worked tirelessly to analyze the cause of the failure. The technical team quickly pinpointed the malfunction, a faulty valve in the propulsion system. It was a minor mistake in a system of incredible complexity, but it was enough to bring the entire mission crashing down. Musk, despite the crushing disappointment, never wavered in his belief. He didn't see failure as an end, he saw it as another step toward success. The world, however, wasn't as forgiving. The media jumped on the failure, with some outlets calling it a disastrous setback that proved Musk's dreams of Mars colonization were too big to ever become reality. Critics questioned his ability to lead, while others began to voice doubts about whether space exploration should be left to private enterprises at all. Some even began to wonder if Musk had bitten off more than he could chew. But Musk did not retreat. He embraced the failure, analyzing every aspect of it, determined to make the next launch a success. The work didn't stop. SpaceX's engineers spent sleepless nights working on modifications, correcting every flaw, and refining the Starship design. Every failure only brought them closer to success. As Musk continued to push forward, another conflict began to emerge, this one far more dangerous than a mere technical glitch or public criticism. Space exploration wasn't just about rockets or spacecraft, it was about human survival in one of the most inhospitable environments imaginable. Mars wasn't just another stop on a road trip, it was a world that would test the very limits of human endurance. Preparing for a manned mission to Mars meant dealing with an array of life-or-death problems. The first issue was food. For any crew that would venture to Mars, they needed enough supplies to last for months, or even years, on the barren surface of the planet. Musk's initial ideas were ambitious, relying on sustainable farming methods in Martian greenhouses. But the realities of growing food on Mars were starkly different from the optimism of the early plans. The soil on Mars was toxic, and the atmosphere was far too thin to support plant life without extraordinary technological assistance. Musk and his team quickly realized that they would need to develop advanced systems for food production, recycling waste, and ensuring long-term sustainability for the crew. Failure in this area wasn't an option. Without food, the entire mission would fail. But food was only the beginning. The next challenge was water. Mars has no large bodies of water, just ice beneath its surface, and even that would be difficult to access. How could the crew survive on a planet where water was a precious, limited resource? SpaceX had to develop cutting-edge systems for extracting water from the Martian soil, recycling every drop, and ensuring that the crew wouldn't perish from dehydration. The atmosphere on Mars is mostly carbon dioxide, with very little oxygen to breathe. Musk's team had to design habitats that could create their own breathable air, using chemical processes to separate oxygen from the carbon dioxide. The importance of these systems was clear. Without them, the crew wouldn't survive long enough to even step foot on the Martian surface. These technological challenges were daunting. But Musk's vision for Mars went beyond just surviving on the planet, it was about thriving. Colonizing Mars meant building cities, developing infrastructure, and creating a self-sustaining ecosystem that could one day support millions of people. The road ahead was not just one of technological innovation, it was a journey into the unknown, full of dangers, obstacles, and risks that no one could fully predict. Despite the overwhelming odds, Musk continued to push forward, driven by an unshakable belief in the mission. There were moments when even he doubted the scale of what he had set out to do. But then, every time the team overcame a setback, every time a system was perfected, every time a failure led to a lesson, he was reminded that the journey to Mars was bigger than any one person or company. For Musk, this was the ultimate adventure. It was the final frontier, a mission not just to explore, but to ensure the survival of the human species. The hardships were great, but so was the reward. And as the SpaceX engineers prepared for the next test, the next launch, and the next step toward Mars, Musk knew one thing for certain: the battle for survival wasn't over. It had only just begun. The journey to Mars wasn't just about rockets and spacecraft, it was about pushing the boundaries of human resilience. As the team at SpaceX worked tirelessly to overcome technological and logistical barriers, something even more significant began to take shape: an emotional transformation. The stakes weren't just about getting to Mars, they were about what it meant to be human. This chapter marked the emotional climax, the turning point where failure seemed inevitable, but the mission found a surprising light amidst the darkness. The next test for the Starship was going to be different. After several failed prototypes, the engineering team was more focused than ever. It wasn't just about improving the systems, it was about proving to the world that SpaceX wasn't a fluke. Musk had staked everything on the mission, his personal wealth, his reputation, and his belief in a future beyond Earth. If this next test failed, the dream of Mars would slip further away, and the financial strain would mount to an almost unbearable point. But failure, Musk knew, was an option. If they were to reach Mars, they had to learn from it. The night before the launch, the usual bustle at SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California, felt quieter than usual. There was an unspoken tension in the air. Engineers who had spent countless sleepless nights fine-tuning the Starship prototype were staring at their screens, lost in their thoughts. Many had lost sleep over the risks, the sheer scale of what they were trying to do. It was one thing to design a rocket to launch satellites. It was another entirely to design a craft that could carry humans into deep space, let alone to Mars. Musk, however, was as calm as ever. To him, the weight of the mission had always been present, but he never allowed the weight to overwhelm him. He had his doubts, of course, doubts about his leadership, doubts about the mission's feasibility, but he had learned over the years that doubt wasn't something to be avoided. It was something to be acknowledged and then set aside. He told his team the night before the launch, "We're going to fail many times before we succeed, but that's how we'll get there. Each failure takes us one step closer to Mars." The next day, as the sun began to rise over Boca Chica, Texas, the crowd gathered in silence. This was no ordinary launch. The eyes of the world were on SpaceX, waiting to see if Musk's dream would collapse once again. The Falcon 9 rocket, adorned with the sleek new Starship atop it, gleamed in the morning light, standing tall like a symbol of human ambition and determination. As the countdown began, Musk stood among his engineers, watching intently. The air was thick with anticipation. The rocket engines roared to life, and the Starship ascended into the sky. The crowd erupted in applause, and for a moment, it seemed as though the world held its breath. SpaceX had finally reached a crucial milestone, the Starship prototype was in the air. But it was only a beginning. The real test lay ahead. A few minutes after takeoff, something went terribly wrong. As the rocket reached the critical point of its ascent, it lost stability. The Starship tilted sharply, spinning uncontrollably, as if refusing to obey the will of the engineers who had designed it. Then came the explosion, a fiery eruption that sent shockwaves through the crowd. For a brief, terrible moment, there was nothing but smoke and flame. The mission had failed again. Musk felt a wave of emotion wash over him. His heart sank, not because he didn't expect failure, but because each failure brought them further away from the dream of Mars. There was no sugarcoating it. The emotions were raw, and as the smoke cleared, a sense of disbelief lingered in the air. It was yet another spectacular failure. But as he stood there in silence, watching the remains of Starship burn away, something inside Musk shifted. This wasn't the end. This was simply another chapter in the story of humanity's greatest adventure. He looked around at his engineers, many of whom had worked so hard for this moment, and he said, "This is the kind of failure we learn from. We will keep going. We'll fix this." What followed in the days after the failure was nothing short of miraculous. SpaceX's engineers didn't wallow in despair, instead, they got back to work. There was no time for self-pity. They began to dissect the failure, breaking it down into every possible factor that could have contributed to the explosion. Hours turned into days as they figured out the problem, a design flaw in the thrust vector control system that led to the loss of stability. But now that they knew what went wrong, they had the key to solving it. However, the most pivotal moment came when Musk, after what seemed like an endless series of failures, gathered his team in a small meeting room. "We're not just building rockets," he told them, "we're building a new future. It's going to be hard, and it's going to be painful. But the only way forward is through the fire. And through it, we'll get stronger. In that moment, Musk's words resonated deeply with the team. The challenges of Mars were no longer abstract or distant, they were real, and they were present in the hearts of everyone who worked tirelessly to make it happen. It was more than just a mission to Mars, it was a mission to prove that humanity could overcome its greatest obstacles, that it could push past the limitations that Earth had placed on it. And as the team rallied, the first signs of success began to emerge. The next prototype launched, and though it wasn't perfect, it didn't explode. It reached its intended altitude and came back down safely. It was a small victory, but in the face of so many failures, it felt like the first step toward Mars. The team celebrated, but with humility, knowing that the road was long, and the real work had just begun. SpaceX wasn't just a company now, it was a symbol. Musk's dream had inspired millions, from engineers working in the trenches to ordinary people watching from their living rooms. They all saw something in the mission, something far beyond the engineering feats and rocket launches. They saw the hope of a new beginning. A future where humanity would transcend its earthly bounds and begin to look to the stars. Musk, with his unyielding resolve, had just proven something important: the path to Mars would not be easy, but it would be possible. And as SpaceX embarked on the next phase of its journey, the world watched with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The road was fraught with dangers, but Musk had ignited a spark. And sparks, no matter how small, could ignite fires that would change the world. With the success of the Starship's partial test flight, SpaceX's team had moved beyond the initial thrill of survival. The failure of their earlier attempts had turned into something more, a story of resilience, persistence, and an unyielding drive toward the impossible. But even as the team celebrated their incremental success, the real challenge still loomed ahead. Mars wasn't just a distant dream anymore, it was becoming a reality, and that meant there was no turning back. Musk and his team, though encouraged by the small victories, knew that the hardest part of the mission was still ahead of them. Getting to Mars was one thing, surviving once there was an entirely different challenge. But the relentless march of time left no room for complacency. The clock was ticking, and with it, the pressure to get everything right grew heavier with each passing day. One of the biggest hurdles for Musk and SpaceX was the transportation of crew and supplies to Mars. While the technology to send a spacecraft into orbit was well understood, sending people and life-sustaining resources across millions of miles of space, where no one had ever gone before, was an entirely different matter. Every detail had to be perfect. There was no room for error, no safety net in the vastness of space. The plan was ambitious: Starship, the reusable spacecraft that had been designed and redesigned for years, would carry the first crewed mission to Mars. But in order to do that, SpaceX would have to develop a new infrastructure to support life on the Red Planet. This included systems for producing water, air, and food, basic necessities that humanity had taken for granted on Earth. Without these systems, the mission wouldn't survive the 6-month journey to Mars, let alone the years it would take to establish a permanent colony. As Musk sat in a meeting with his top engineers, they discussed the various elements that still needed to be solved. There was still uncertainty around how to grow food on Mars, how to create a sustainable energy source, and how to protect the crew from the harmful effects of cosmic radiation. Each problem was its own nightmare, but none of them were insurmountable. The solutions were there, hidden in the minds of SpaceX's brightest engineers. "We can't just send a few people to Mars," Musk said, leaning forward in his chair, his gaze fixed on the board filled with technical drawings. "We have to send everything necessary for a colony. And that means developing sustainable systems for water, food, and power. These will be the pillars of humanity's future." Despite the daunting nature of the work ahead, the atmosphere in the room was electric. The engineers and scientists around the table were driven not by fear of failure but by the vision Musk had articulated, the opportunity to create something that would change humanity forever. The weight of it was undeniable, but so was the excitement. This was the cutting edge of human achievement. They were building the future. The months that followed were filled with a blur of activity. Starship prototypes, now refined, began flying regularly. Each test flight was an event in itself, with the eyes of the world trained on SpaceX's progress. The first crewed mission to Mars wasn't just an ordinary launch, it was a world-changing event. People from all over the globe followed the mission with bated breath, some in awe, others in skepticism, but all in agreement that humanity was about to take its first step onto another planet. But as the date for the mission drew closer, the scale of what Musk and his team had set out to accomplish became even more apparent. It wasn't just a question of technological advancements anymore, it was about what they were going to leave behind. The team at SpaceX had become a family. They had lived through setbacks together, celebrated successes together, and now, they were facing an uncertain future together. Many of them would never see Earth again. Mars would be their home for the rest of their lives. Musk, too, had changed. The young, brash entrepreneur who had once been obsessed with making money and disrupting industries had transformed into something more. He had become a visionary in the truest sense of the word. The dream of Mars had grown from a mere business venture to a life-altering pursuit of humanity's future. He often found himself reflecting on the mission and what it would mean for future generations. But even as the world marveled at the scope of the project, Musk knew there would always be those who questioned it. The skeptics who argued that humanity should focus on solving Earth's problems before venturing off into space. Critics who saw Mars colonization as a foolish, expensive, and reckless venture. Yet, Musk held firm in his belief that the mission was necessary. Why Mars? He had been asked countless times. Why take on something so impossible? His answer had always been the same, because if we don't, humanity is at risk. If we want to ensure the survival of our species, we must look beyond Earth. We must become a multiplanetary species. The future of humanity doesn't just lie on Earth, it lies in the stars. On the eve of the first crewed mission to Mars, a sense of quiet had settled over SpaceX's headquarters. The countdown had begun, and everything was ready. Starship had been tested, the crew was prepared, and the technology to sustain life on Mars had been fully developed. But even with all the preparation, there was a palpable feeling of anxiety. They had come so far, but no one knew exactly what awaited them on the surface of Mars. As Musk stood outside the hangar where Starship sat ready for launch, he gazed up at the night sky. The stars seemed impossibly distant, and the enormity of the journey he had started so many years ago hit him fully for the first time. He had spent years leading SpaceX through countless challenges, but this was different. This was the ultimate test of human willpower and determination. He turned to his team, who had gathered around him, some of them wearing expressions of excitement, others of deep thought. Tomorrow, Musk said quietly, we begin a new chapter. It's not just about Mars. It's about our future, about making sure humanity survives beyond the Earth. If we fail, that's okay. But we have to try. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic fanfare. Just a simple truth: tomorrow, SpaceX would launch the first crewed mission to Mars, and the future of humanity would take its first step beyond Earth. As the sun rose the next day, the world held its breath. SpaceX had already changed the world. But today, they would begin to change humanity's destiny. The moment had finally arrived. SpaceX had poured years of effort, sweat, and ingenuity into this mission, and today, everything would either fall into place or collapse in a blaze of spectacular failure. But failure, as Elon Musk often said, was an option, it was just part of the journey to greatness. And now, it was time to take the first real step toward Mars. The crew that would venture to the Red Planet wasn't just a group of trained astronauts. They were the pioneers of a new era, a new chapter in humanity's story. Among them was Captain Emily Fields, a veteran astronaut with a calm demeanor that had kept the team grounded through countless simulations. Her leadership was unquestioned, and her ability to stay level-headed under pressure had earned her the respect of everyone around her. Alongside her was Dr. Victor Patel, a brilliant engineer who had been instrumental in designing the life support systems for the Mars mission. There was also Lieutenant Marco Alvarez, a former Navy pilot, who was known for his quick reflexes and ability to handle high-stakes situations with ease. Finally, Dr. Lily Zhang, a biologist and expert in extraterrestrial life, was there to study Mars' potential for supporting life, and to help the crew survive during their long stay. As they suited up and prepared for their journey, there was an air of quiet determination. The launch pad at Boca Chica was humming with activity, a testament to the precision and teamwork that had gotten them this far. The starship sat proudly on the launch pad, towering over the landscape like a modern-day colossus. Its metallic surface gleamed in the sunlight, reflecting the dreams and ambitions of countless people who had worked tirelessly to make this moment a reality. "Today, we make history," Musk said as he walked through the control room, nodding to the engineers and scientists who had spent years working on the mission. "This isn't just about SpaceX. This is about all of us. About humanity. We're taking the first steps toward becoming a multiplanetary species." The crew boarded Starship, their faces a mixture of excitement and apprehension. For Captain Fields, this was the culmination of a career that had started as a young child, looking up at the stars and dreaming of a life beyond Earth. For Dr. Patel, it was the realization of a dream that had driven him to work around the clock for years, creating the systems that would ensure the survival of the crew. For Alvarez, it was the chance to fly the greatest spacecraft ever designed, and for Dr. Zhang, it was the opportunity to do what no human had done before, to study Mars up close, to explore its mysteries firsthand. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8, the voice echoed through the comm system, the tension in the air palpable. Outside, the engines of the starship rumbled to life, their fiery glow casting long shadows across the barren land of Texas. Musk stood with a small group in the control room, watching the screens intently. His hands were clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the launch pad. His heart was racing, but there was a calmness to him. He knew that what they were doing today would change the world. Whether they succeeded or not, the act of launching this mission was a milestone in the history of humanity. 3, 2, 1, ignition. With that, the starship's engines roared to life, a deafening sound that shook the very ground beneath them. The rocket lifted off with incredible force, cutting through the air as it soared into the sky. The world held its breath as the spacecraft ascended, steadily climbing higher and higher into the atmosphere. The astronauts felt the force of the launch pushing them back into their seats. Despite the immense power beneath them, the craft felt smooth, almost as though it was gliding through the air. For a brief moment, everything felt surreal. It was happening. They were leaving Earth. The dream of Mars was now no longer a dream, it was a reality. As the ship passed through the Kármán line, the official boundary of space, cheers erupted in the control room. SpaceX had just completed the most successful launch in its history. But this was only the beginning. The next step was even more critical, the journey to Mars itself. Starship's course was locked in. The crew would need to complete several critical orbital maneuvers in order to slingshot their way to Mars. For the astronauts on board, the journey ahead would be grueling. The spacecraft was equipped with life support systems, advanced artificial intelligence, and autonomous control systems that would assist them in their long voyage. But still, the road ahead was uncertain. They would spend the next several months in the cramped confines of Starship, with no way to return until they reached Mars. "I think it's finally hitting me," Dr. Patel said over the comms, breaking the silence in the crew cabin. "We're really doing this. I mean, it's one thing to train for it, but another thing entirely to be up here." Emily Fields chuckled softly, looking out the window at the fading Earth below. "We've trained for this. We've prepared for every possible outcome. And we're going to make it." The vast emptiness of space stretched out before them. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a reminder of how small humanity was in the grand scale of the universe. The crew settled into their routines, adjusting to the artificial gravity and their new surroundings. Each day was filled with tasks, from checking the spacecraft systems to studying the life support systems to ensuring their psychological well-being. The isolation was real, but they were all motivated by a common goal. They were going to Mars, and nothing would stop them. The journey to Mars was long and unforgiving. The crew encountered countless obstacles, from minor malfunctions in the spacecraft's systems to the psychological strain of being so far from Earth. The communication delay between Mars and Earth made it difficult to receive real-time assistance. But the crew remained resolute, always finding solutions and supporting one another. They knew that failure wasn't an option. As they neared Mars, the planet's red surface began to come into view, a distant, unwelcoming world, but one that promised possibility. It was a world that could become their home. Starship entered Mars' orbit, and the crew began preparing for their descent to the surface. The atmosphere was thin, and the winds howled, but the spacecraft's landing systems were equipped to handle the challenges of the Martian surface. The final descent was tense, every moment filled with anticipation. This wasn't just a landing. This was the birth of a new chapter in human history. The engines fired as they touched down on the surface of Mars, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris. The crew braced themselves, holding their breath as the spacecraft's wheels made contact with the Martian soil. The sound of the landing was deafening in the silence of the cabin. "We're here," Captain Field said, her voice filled with awe. And just like that, they had done it. They had landed on Mars. Humanity had taken its first steps on another planet. The dust cloud settled slowly, the metallic body of Starship standing still against the rusty landscape of Mars. For the crew inside, there was a strange silence. The whir of the spacecraft's systems, the hum of life support monitors, the familiar sounds of human activity, they were all muted by the enormity of what they had just accomplished. Captain Emily Fields unstrapped herself from her seat, her fingers trembling as she reached for the hatch release. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. For her, this was the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and dreams that once seemed impossible. Mars wasn't just a destination, it was a second chance for humanity. A chance to begin again. "All right," Emily's voice crackled through the comms, steady but with a slight edge of emotion, "let's make history." Dr. Victor Patel, ever the pragmatic one, was already running diagnostics, double-checking systems. He needed to ensure everything was perfect, even in the midst of this monumental moment. His hands were steady, but the look in his eyes betrayed the enormity of the task at hand. This wasn't just about setting foot on Mars, it was about survival. They needed to make sure the equipment they had brought was functional, that they could grow food, that the air filtration systems worked, that their communications with Earth remained stable. Everything they had worked for depended on it. Behind him, Lieutenant Marco Alvarez was grinning. His usual confidence was replaced by something deeper, a quiet reverence. He knew what this meant for humanity. No one had set foot on Mars before them. For the first time in human history, the planet was no longer an unreachable dot in the sky. It was real. The last member of the crew, Dr. Lily Zhang, stood at the rear of the cabin, staring out the porthole at the barren landscape. She had spent years studying this planet, dreaming of the day she would study its soil, its atmosphere, its potential for life. Now, that day had come. The research she had devoted her life to was no longer theoretical. It was all about to unfold in real time. "Everything's good to go," Victor announced. "Life support, communications, power systems, no errors. It's time." The moment arrived. Emily Fields moved to the hatch and slowly activated the release. The heavy door groaned as it slid open, revealing the Martian landscape, vast, quiet, and infinite in its desolation. The pale orange soil stretched as far as the eye could see, interrupted only by distant hills and the jagged peaks of Martian mountains on the horizon. A new world, one that was both alien and eerily familiar. Without a word, Emily climbed down the ladder and onto the surface. She took a deep breath, though she knew the air wasn't breathable. She had to remind herself that they were wearing spacesuits, their bodies protected from the harsh environment of Mars. But for a moment, she simply stood still, the weight of her suit and the harsh environment around her forgotten. Her boots crunched softly on the fine Martian dust. She reached down and scooped up a handful of the soil, feeling the powdery texture against her gloved fingers. It was an extraordinary feeling, one that no human had experienced before. This wasn't just land, it was the beginning of humanity's future. The rest of the crew followed, stepping cautiously onto the surface. Each movement felt monumental, as though each footstep marked the beginning of a new era. They had arrived. And they were not just visitors, they were settlers. This was their new home. "We're here," Marco Alvarez said, his voice full of awe, reverberating through his helmet. "We're really here." Lily Zhang knelt down, gently pressing her gloved fingers into the soil. "It's like nothing I've ever seen," she said. "Mars is a world unlike any other." Victor, who had been scanning the horizon with a critical eye, turned toward the crew. "We've got work to do. But take a moment. This is what we've all been fighting for." For a few minutes, there was a profound silence. A silence that stretched far beyond the empty winds of Mars, a silence that spoke of the magnitude of the moment. This wasn't just about technology or mission planning. It was about humanity's drive to explore, to survive, to push the boundaries of what was possible. And now, they had done it. They had taken the first steps on Mars. "Let's make this count," Emily said, her voice steady now, the weight of the moment behind her. "We didn't come all this way just to stand around. We have a planet to build." They moved into action, setting up the equipment they would need to begin their work. The initial mission plan was clear: collect samples, set up habitat systems, start the process of terraforming, gradually creating an environment that could sustain life. The survival of the crew depended on their ability to adapt quickly, to build a stable base, and to make Mars a place where humans could live and thrive. As the crew worked, there was an undeniable sense of urgency. The pressure of the mission was real. There was no going back. Yet, with every task, they were building something greater than themselves. They were building the future. Hours passed as they activated the solar panels, set up communication arrays, and began unpacking the critical supplies needed for their survival. Emily stood to the side, watching her team work, her thoughts momentarily drifting. For her, the journey to Mars had been years in the making. It had been a dream since she was a little girl, staring up at the stars, wondering what was out there. Now, she was standing on a foreign world, leading a team that would change history. "You okay?" Lily asked, noticing Emily's distant gaze. Emily smiled faintly. "Just taking it all in." Lily nodded. "It's overwhelming, isn't it? It feels like we're part of something much bigger than us." "Yeah," Emily replied softly. "But it's also terrifying. We're on the edge of something we don't fully understand. Anything could happen." Lily's eyes were intense, but there was a quiet confidence there. "We've prepared for this. We're not alone in this. We've got each other." Emily nodded, her resolve strengthening. "And we've got Mars." As the sun began to set, casting a pale orange glow over the Martian horizon, the crew took a moment to reflect. The harshness of the planet was undeniable, but so was the beauty in its solitude. Mars was a world of possibility, and it was waiting for humanity to claim it. They were the pioneers of a new frontier, and this was just the beginning. "Tomorrow, we get to work," Emily said, her voice clear with purpose. And so, the first day on Mars ended, leaving behind a world forever changed, and the crew of Starship left with the knowledge that their journey had only just begun. The excitement of their first steps on Mars had settled into the realization that they were now truly living in an alien world. The crew had landed, but the work was far from over. The harsh reality of survival on Mars was beginning to set in. As the days wore on, the team settled into their routines. They knew that their success on Mars would not be determined by how fast they could get out of their suits and onto the planet, but by how efficiently they could set up a sustainable base. The Martian environment, while awe-inspiring, was unforgiving. It presented a set of unique challenges that the crew hadn't fully anticipated, even with all their months of training and preparation. The most pressing challenge was the limited resources. Mars was dry, with no natural water sources, and the atmosphere was thin, composed mostly of carbon dioxide. The crew was heavily reliant on the supplies they had brought with them, oxygen, food, water, and the systems they had set up to extract what they could from the environment. They needed to ensure their survival for the long haul. But as much as the team had trained for emergencies, there were things you couldn't simulate in a lab or on Earth. One of the first real obstacles they faced was a malfunction in the oxygen generator. A minor leak was discovered in the unit responsible for converting the Martian atmosphere into breathable air. It wasn't enough to cause immediate concern, but it was a problem they couldn't ignore. They couldn't afford to waste any resources. A failure in the oxygen supply would mean certain death. Victor Patel and Emily immediately began working on the issue. The rest of the crew went about their tasks, aware of the looming danger. "What do you think?" Emily asked, glancing over her shoulder at Victor as he opened the back panel of the oxygen generator. His hands moved swiftly, a focused precision to his every movement. The faint hiss of escaping air was all that could be heard as he worked. "I think it's fixable," Victor said, his voice calm, but there was an edge to it. "But we have to be quick. We're working on borrowed time here." Emily nodded, her heart racing. It was moments like this that defined the difference between life and death on Mars. They couldn't afford to make mistakes. Not with the clock ticking, not with the knowledge that Earth was so far away, the communications delay making any real-time help impossible. Victor moved with practiced efficiency, replacing a faulty valve and tightening several connections. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Emily watched him work, her mind already running through contingencies. If they couldn't fix it, they would have to rely on the backup system, which was designed to last for a limited time. But even that was no guarantee. Finally, after what seemed like an age, Victor stood back. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, though the temperature inside the habitat was controlled. "It's fixed. But we're going to need to keep an eye on it. I don't want to be in a situation where we're patching things together on the fly again." Emily exhaled, her body suddenly releasing the tension that had built up in her chest. She felt a surge of relief, but there was no time for celebration. They had to keep moving forward. "We need to get the solar panels fully operational today. If we lose power, we lose everything," she said, looking over at the rest of the crew, who were busy with their own tasks. Captain Fields had a plan. She wasn't going to let one malfunction, no matter how critical, define their mission. As the day progressed, the crew worked tirelessly. They conducted the first of many tests on their habitat systems, made minor adjustments to their food and water production systems, and checked every other piece of equipment they'd brought. Mars was a cold, unforgiving place, and the more they worked, the more they realized how close to the edge they were. Every step forward was a victory, but every failure could be catastrophic. As dusk fell, the team gathered inside the habitat for a quick debrief. The walls were lined with screens showing various status updates, life support systems, oxygen levels, power levels, fuel, and supplies. The data was mostly green, indicating that everything was functioning within acceptable parameters. But that didn't mean they were out of danger. The Martian environment was still unpredictable. "We're holding up, but we're not out of the woods yet," Emily said, leaning against the table, her arms folded across her chest. "We've managed to get the oxygen generator back online, and we're on track with the solar panels. But we need to stay vigilant. We're not in a position to afford a single mistake." Lily Zhang nodded. "And we need to start thinking about how we're going to grow food. The crops we brought with us won't last forever. We need a self-sustaining system that works here, on Mars." "We're working on it," Marco Alvarez chimed in. "We've got the hydroponic system set up, and the first round of seedlings is already in place. It's just a matter of making sure the temperature and humidity are regulated properly." Victor added, "The power grid is stable for now, but if we lose power, we lose everything. The solar panels are our lifeline. I'll continue monitoring them, but we'll need to build a backup system for redundancy." Emily's gaze swept over her crew, the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her. These weren't just colleagues. These were her partners, her teammates, the people who had entrusted her with their lives. And she had to make sure they got through this. Every minute that passed was a step closer to a sustainable future. But every minute also brought the possibility of failure. One mistake, one misstep, and everything could go wrong. "All right," Emily said, standing tall. "We stick together, we keep our heads in the game, and we keep moving forward. We knew this wasn't going to be easy. But we're here because we believe we can do this. We are humanity's future. We are the first. Let's make sure we stay the first." The crew exchanged looks of solidarity. They had come too far to turn back now. The night passed slowly as they continued working. The habitat was quiet, the sounds of their movements the only indication of the human presence on this cold, distant world. But in the silence, there was a sense of hope, a glimmer of optimism. Mars might be harsh, but it was also a world full of possibilities. They were the first to step on its surface, and they were the first to turn it into something they could call home. Tomorrow, they would face new challenges. But for now, they had survived. And that was enough. The days on Mars were long and taxing, each one blending into the next as the crew adjusted to their new life. The challenges of survival weren't always visible but were constantly lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. The crew had dealt with malfunctions, systems failures, and the psychological strain of isolation, but Mars had something far more insidious in store for them. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. A faint hum in the habitat's communication systems, a slight flicker in the lights. Nothing major, but enough to make Emily Fields furrow her brow. They had grown accustomed to the technical quirks of living in a high-stakes environment, but this felt different. It wasn't like a malfunction they could troubleshoot and fix. For a few days, the team dismissed it. After all, they were on Mars, everything was bound to be unpredictable. But then things started to deteriorate further. On the fourth day after the oxygen generator repair, Marco Alvarez noticed something strange during his routine check of the solar array. "Hey, Emily, you might want to take a look at this," Marco called over the comm system. "The power output is lower than it should be. I'm seeing a gradual drop, but it's significant." Emily was already en route. She could feel the pulse of tension in the pit of her stomach. If the solar panels weren't generating power at full capacity, they were in serious trouble. Without power, their systems would fail, food production, heating, life support, all of it depended on the solar arrays. When she arrived, Marco had already begun investigating the panels. His normally confident demeanor had been replaced with a look of concern. "It doesn't make sense. The panels are clean. No dust accumulation. No debris blocking them. But I'm still seeing a drop in power." Emily knelt beside him, running her gloved hand along the surface of the solar panel. It was smooth, without the faintest sign of anything that might impede the flow of energy. The Mars dust, she thought. It was notorious for getting into every crevice, but these panels were designed to withstand that. Could it be the alignment? Emily asked, trying to keep her voice calm, though she felt a flicker of unease. Marco shook his head. "I checked that earlier. They're aligned perfectly. Something's off, but I don't know what." They had only one option left, to manually test the wiring beneath the panels. It wasn't an ideal solution, as it meant taking the panels offline for a period of time, a dangerous gamble when their power reserves were already low. But they had no choice. As Marco and Emily worked through the delicate process of recalibrating the solar panel systems, the rest of the crew continued their tasks, their attention split between the constant need for maintenance and the ongoing psychological strain of being so far from Earth. Victor Patel was deep in his research on how to grow sustainable crops in the hydroponics bay. It was one of the most critical tasks ahead of them. The long-term sustainability of their mission depended on it. If they couldn't grow food here, they would eventually starve. Lily Zhang was working with the rover outside, gathering geological samples from a nearby crater. It was supposed to be a routine task, part of their mission to map and understand Mars' composition. But as she worked, a strange feeling began to creep over her. There was something unsettling about the planet's silence. It wasn't just the lack of sound, Mars had its own eerie stillness, but it was the sense that they were being watched. She dismissed the thought as paranoia, but it lingered. Back in the habitat, Emily and Marco finally finished testing the wiring. "Got it," Marco said, pulling a cable from the junction box. The issue was in the secondary connection. A loose wire. "Should be good now." Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Let's see if the power output comes back online." They reconnected the panels to the system and watched as the numbers on the monitoring system started to climb back up. Slowly at first, but then with a gradual increase. It looked like the problem had been resolved. "Looks like we're back on track," Emily said, letting the relief wash over her. But just as they were about to relax, the lights in the habitat flickered again. Emily's heart sank. The power was fluctuating again, and this time, it was happening faster. A surge of panic went through her. This wasn't right. The solar array was working perfectly, so why was the power dipping again? "Victor," she called over the comms. "Do a full systems check. Something's off." Victor's voice crackled through. "Understood. I'll run diagnostics." Moments later, he was on the line again, sounding more alarmed than she had ever heard him. "Emily, I don't know how to explain this, but the data shows that someone or something is siphoning off the power. It's as if we're losing it somewhere, but there's no physical reason for it. No malfunctions, no damage to the wiring. It's almost like the systems are being manipulated." "Manipulated?" Emily echoed, her mind racing. "By what?" "I can't say for sure, but it doesn't make sense," Victor continued. "There's no natural phenomenon that could cause this. Not unless—" He didn't finish his sentence, but Emily felt the weight of his unspoken fear. "Unless what?" she asked, her voice tight. "Unless we're not alone." The realization hit her like a punch in the gut. There was no animal life on Mars, no predators, no creatures that could threaten them. But what if something else, something far more insidious, was happening? Something they couldn't detect with their instruments? She thought back to Lily's earlier unease. The sensation of being watched. It hadn't been just paranoia. Something was on Mars, something that was not supposed to be there. They were being sabotaged, but the question was, by whom or what? "Everyone, gather in the habitat. We need to talk," Emily ordered, her voice cutting through the silence of the comms. As the crew assembled, Emily paced in front of them, her thoughts swirling. "The power issues we've been having aren't just technical failures. Something's wrong. Something's draining our systems, and I don't know how to stop it." Lily's eyes flickered nervously. "You think it's something outside?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. "But we need to find out what's really happening. We can't afford any more surprises. We need to stay ahead of this." Victor nodded. "I'll run more tests. We'll isolate the source. We're not going to let Mars take us down." "But how do we fight an enemy we can't see?" Marco asked, his voice quiet with the weight of the realization. "What if it's something we don't understand? Something bigger than us?" Emily didn't have an answer. She only knew one thing: they had to stay alive. They had to solve this mystery before it was too late. Mars had already proven to be a challenge, but now it was clear that their survival was not just about the environment. There was something else, something hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. And they had no idea what they were about to face. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The first real crack in their security had appeared. Mars had always been a world of isolation, but now, with their systems seemingly failing and the crew haunted by an ever-growing sense of being watched, they were beginning to realize that their survival on the red planet was far more precarious than they had ever anticipated. As the days passed, the crew felt a slow, creeping dread settle over the base. Every shift was filled with anxious glances and hushed conversations. Mars had become more than a planet, it had become a vast, unknowable entity, one that had its own will, and it was clear now that they had only begun to scratch the surface of its mysteries. Emily Fields had been the first to notice the pattern, the flickering lights, the power drain, the low hum in the background of their communication systems. Each issue seemed insignificant at first, a minor glitch. But as the malfunctions grew more frequent, more intrusive, the truth became undeniable: something was wrong. Something wasn't just malfunctioning, something was actively interfering with their mission. Victor Patel was working tirelessly in the control room, analyzing every available system to identify the source of the problem. Emily had watched him pore over diagnostics for hours, growing more frustrated by the minute. He wasn't one to give up easily, but the signs were clear. The interference wasn't from within their own equipment. It wasn't something that could be fixed by a quick tweak or an emergency patch. "We're dealing with something we can't see, Emily," Victor said, his voice low, his brow furrowed. "There's an anomaly, an energy signature I can't identify. It's like a wave of energy is passing through the base, affecting all our systems. It's almost like something's drawing power from us." Emily leaned over the console, her eyes narrowing at the fluctuating readings on the screen. The patterns were odd, erratic, unpredictable, as though the interference was moving, shifting. And yet, it was only happening in the habitat, not outside. Mars was a barren landscape, void of any natural phenomena that could cause this. "It's not just the power drain," Emily said, her voice tinged with urgency. "The environmental controls are fluctuating too. The temperature in the habitat is starting to spike. The life support systems are losing pressure in some of the chambers. It's like Mars itself is fighting back." "Fighting back?" Victor echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Think about it," Emily said, her mind racing. "When we first arrived, the challenges were all about the environment: harsh weather, limited resources, maintaining life support. But now, something is happening that we can't control. It's as if the planet is pushing back, resisting our presence. We've been living in harmony with the equipment and systems we've brought, but maybe we've underestimated Mars. Maybe there's more here than we thought." Victor stood silently for a moment, digesting her words. "You think there's something on Mars that's responsible for this?" "I don't know," Emily admitted. "But I can't ignore the signs anymore. We're not dealing with a simple technical failure or a bug in the system. There's something here, something we're not equipped to deal with. And it's only getting worse." They both fell into silence, the weight of the revelation settling over them like a cloud. Whatever was happening, they were in uncharted territory. The next day, Lily Zhang and Marco Alvarez returned from a routine geological survey outside the base. As they entered the habitat, their faces were pale, their expressions taut with anxiety. "We found something," Lily said, her voice shaking slightly. "Something in the soil, in the rocks. We didn't even know it was there until we started analyzing the readings. There's a high concentration of something. I don't know what it is, but it's unlike anything we've seen before." Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "What kind of concentration?" "Radiation," Marco replied, his voice grave. "Not enough to be lethal, but it's unlike anything on Earth. It's as if there's a constant, low-level emission coming from beneath the surface. It's been here long before we arrived." Lily nodded. "We don't know if it's natural or if it's being somehow emitted by something in the ground, or even under the surface." The implications were terrifying. Mars was not the empty, desolate planet they had hoped for. There was something beneath the surface, something that could be influencing their mission in ways they didn't understand. And that something might be alive. What are we dealing with? Emily asked, her voice shaking slightly. I don't know, Lily said. But the more we dig, the more we uncover. The radiation is strong enough that it's interfering with our equipment. It's like it's scrambling our signals. And it's growing stronger the deeper we go. The crew was silent for a moment, each of them grappling with the weight of what they were hearing. Emily stood up from her chair, walking to the window and staring out at the barren landscape of Mars. The wind outside howled, sending the red dust swirling in every direction. It was a place of quiet beauty, yes, but now, it felt like a prison. Like something was waiting for them, something they couldn't see but could feel in the air, in the power draining from their systems, in the strange radiation from beneath the planet's surface. There's no going back, Emily said softly. We've come too far. But if we're going to make it, we need to understand what we're dealing with. We need to find out what's beneath the surface. And we need to do it before whatever is happening here goes too far. Victor met her gaze. How do we even begin? We don't know what we're up against. We start with the facts, Emily said, her voice firming. We go deeper. We start digging, not just into the soil but into what's beneath. Whatever's causing the interference with our systems, it's tied to the planet. We need to find it before it finds us. Lily and Marco exchanged uneasy glances, but they knew she was right. They had no choice but to press forward, to uncover the truth behind the strange occurrences on Mars. I'll prepare the rover, Marco said. We'll need it to venture out and find the source of the radiation. We need samples from deeper in the crater. I'll work with you, Victor added. We'll analyze the data as we go. We'll need to be ready for anything. As the crew prepared to venture deeper into the unknown, Emily took a moment to reflect. The mystery of Mars had shifted from a simple challenge of survival to something far more complex. They weren't just fighting against the environment anymore. They were fighting something hidden beneath the red dust, something ancient, something powerful. The journey ahead would take them further than they ever anticipated. The questions were multiplying faster than the answers. But one thing was clear, they had to face whatever lay ahead, together. The future of humanity depended on it. The days leading up to the mission into the heart of Mars were filled with a sense of trepidation and determination. Emily could feel the shift in the air, something was about to break. The crew had uncovered an anomaly beneath the surface, and now they were going to face it head-on. Whatever it was, whatever had been influencing their systems, it was time to confront it. The rover was prepped, the supplies packed, and the team was ready. The air inside the habitat was tense, each of them aware that the mission ahead might reveal something they were not prepared to handle. There was no turning back now. They had to know the truth, no matter how terrifying or dangerous it might be. Emily stood at the control station, running through the final checks on the rover's systems. Beside her, Marco Alvarez made the last adjustments to the equipment. His face was tight, his eyes fixed on the display, but Emily could sense his unease. The uncertainty of what they were about to do had everyone on edge. Ready? Emily asked, her voice steady but betraying the anxiety she was trying to suppress. As ready as we'll ever be, Marco replied, offering her a small, tight smile. Good. Let's make this quick. We need to get back before the conditions outside worsen. The rover had been equipped with specialized drills and radiation detectors, the tools necessary to probe deeper into Mars' crust. They were heading toward the same crater where Lily and Marco had detected the strange radiation, the place that seemed to pulse with an energy they couldn't understand. Lily Zhang, who had been silent for most of the day, spoke up now. I still don't get it. Why would there be radiation here? Mars is supposed to be a dead planet. It hasn't seen any geological activity for millions of years. Exactly, Emily said, shaking her head as she donned her helmet. That's what worries me. If there's radiation in the soil, it means something has been active. We need to understand why. Victor Patel, who had been glued to the communications console, joined the group with a troubled look on his face. The readings from the surface are still fluctuating. The radiation levels are unpredictable. I don't think the instruments are giving us the whole picture. The deeper you go, the stronger it gets. Emily nodded, then stepped toward the airlock. All right, let's do this. Marco, you'll drive. Lily, Victor, you're with me. Keep your eyes open. We don't know what we're dealing with. The group filed out of the habitat and into the rover. As the airlock sealed behind them, a deep, unsettling silence settled over them. They were leaving the safety of the base, venturing deeper into the unknown. The rover's engines hummed to life, and slowly, it began to roll out across the Martian surface, the red soil stretching out before them, unbroken and endless. As they neared the crater, the landscape grew more rugged, with jagged rocks rising up from the ground, casting long shadows in the weak sunlight. The radiation readings on the rover's display continued to climb. It was almost as if the land itself was alive, pulsating with an energy they couldn't see but could feel in every fiber of their beings. Let's get a closer look, Emily said, her tone sharp as she looked out through the rover's window. The wind outside howled, but it was distant, muted by the rover's hull. Mars was cold and barren, but there was something unsettling in the air, something beneath the surface that was threatening to break free. The rover slowed as they reached the base of the crater. Marco expertly guided it over the uneven terrain, his fingers steady on the controls. He maneuvered the vehicle toward a rock outcrop where they had detected the highest concentration of radiation. We'll drill here, Emily instructed. Victor, scan for any signs of irregular activity. Victor immediately began to analyze the surrounding area with the rover's sensors. His eyes darted across the readings on his screen. I'm not picking up anything abnormal, yet. But I'm getting interference. The closer we get, the more the systems start glitching. Emily's pulse quickened. Stay alert. Marco positioned the rover, then extended the drill arm toward the surface. The drill whirred to life, its tip biting into the Martian crust. The ground beneath them shook slightly, but it was nothing more than a tremor. Emily's mind was elsewhere, her eyes darting between the drill and the surrounding landscape. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. Drills in, Marco said. We've reached the depth we're looking for. Good, Emily replied. Now, let's see what's down there. With a soft hiss, a sample of Martian soil was brought up to the rover's lab. Emily carefully retrieved the sample container, holding it up to the light. The soil looked like any other, dusty and red, with an almost inorganic texture. But as she examined it more closely, something strange caught her eye. Embedded in the soil were small, glimmering fragments, microscopic but distinct, like flecks of metallic dust. Look at this, Emily said, showing the sample to Victor. He took a moment, then ran a series of tests on the rover's diagnostic system. The results were immediate and unnerving. It's not just radiation, Victor said, his voice tight. These fragments, these aren't natural. They have properties unlike anything we've seen on Earth. It's almost like metal. But it's not from any known material. What does that mean? Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It means we're dealing with something far more complex than just Mars itself, Victor said. These fragments are not from the planet. They could have been here for millions of years, or they could have arrived more recently. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. You're saying, this could be evidence of alien life? Victor hesitated, but his expression told her all she needed to know. I'm not saying that definitively, but it's possible. If this metal came from off-planet, then it could mean Mars has hosted something extraterrestrial, in the past. The realization hit like a wave. They weren't just exploring a barren world. They were uncovering remnants of something else, something ancient, perhaps even predating humanity itself. Mars was not just a planet to be conquered. It was a testament to something larger, a puzzle with pieces scattered across eons. Emily could feel the weight of their discovery. Mars was hiding its secrets, and now, they were beginning to find the first clues. But those clues only raised more questions. If Mars had hosted extraterrestrial life, what else could be lurking beneath its surface? What were they truly dealing with? Suddenly, the rover's alarms blared, and the entire team froze. A violent shaking rocked the rover as the ground beneath them trembled. The metallic fragments in the soil started to glow faintly, and the radiation readings surged off the charts. "Get back to the habitat!" Emily shouted. "Now!" Marco slammed the throttle forward, and the rover lurched into motion. But the ground beneath them was shifting, and the tremors were growing stronger. Something was awakening beneath the surface. The crew's hearts raced as they sped toward the base, but the feeling that they were being hunted, watched, grew stronger with every passing second. Mars was no longer just a planet. It was a warning. And the journey to uncover its secrets was only just beginning. The rover tore across the Martian landscape, its engines roaring as they raced back toward the base. The trembling beneath them hadn't stopped, in fact, it had only intensified. The ground was shaking more violently with each passing second, and the sky, if one could call it a sky, seemed to darken, the wind picking up in a frantic, howling frenzy. Emily clutched the handrails, her heart hammering in her chest. The metallic fragments they had found in the soil were still glowing faintly, an eerie, pulsating light that seemed to synchronize with the tremors. It was as if the fragments had triggered something deep below the surface, something ancient and powerful. "Marco, go faster," she shouted, her voice tight with urgency. "I'm trying." Marco yelled back, his grip on the controls white-knuckled. "The tremors are messing with the rover's navigation. It's hard to keep it steady." Lily and Victor were both strapped in behind Emily, their faces drawn, eyes wide with panic. "What is happening?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "Why is the planet reacting like this?" "I don't know," Emily responded, her mind racing. "But I think we've disturbed something. Something powerful, something old." As the rover skidded over a particularly large ridge, the shaking suddenly stopped, plunging them into an unnerving silence. It was as if the world had held its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then, a low rumble echoed from the ground beneath them, followed by a deafening crack. Emily's stomach lurched as the terrain ahead of them split wide open. A massive fissure tore through the surface of Mars, stretching for miles, the edges glowing with an eerie, metallic light. It was as though the planet itself had cracked, revealing something deep within. "Oh my God," Victor breathed. His voice barely rose above a whisper as his eyes locked onto the fissure. Is that what we think it is?" "What is that?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with fear and awe. Emily's mouth went dry as she tried to make sense of the scene before her. The fissure wasn't just a crack, it was a doorway, an opening, and at its heart, something vast and impossibly ancient stirred. The glow from within pulsated, stronger now, and as the crew watched in horror, a shape began to emerge from the depths. It was like nothing they had ever seen. Towering above them, the shape was massive, like a monolith, but alive. It was covered in strange symbols, metallic and smooth, its surface glistening with an unnatural sheen. The air around it hummed with an energy that made their hair stand on end, and the radiation levels in their instruments spiked again, off the charts. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a revelation. "Get out! Get out now!" Emily screamed. She was already unstrapping herself, trying to make sense of the chaos. The crew scrambled to do the same, fear and adrenaline coursing through them. The ground continued to shake, and the sound of something enormous moving beneath them reverberated through the rover's hull. The monolithic structure that had emerged from the depths was beginning to move, its massive form shifting like it was waking from a long slumber. "What is this?" Marco asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Emily said, her mind whirling with disbelief and terror. "But whatever it is, it's alive." With a sudden, jarring motion, the rover jerked to a halt as the ground shifted beneath it. The glow from the structure intensified, now illuminating the entire landscape, casting long, terrifying shadows. The ground below the rover cracked again, and they could hear the deep rumbling grow louder, resonating in their bones. Emily's hands trembled as she grabbed the comms system. "Victor, is it safe to get out?" she asked, her voice almost cracking. Victor didn't respond immediately. His face was pale as he studied the data in front of him. I'm not sure. But the energy readings are off the charts. We need to get to safety. If that thing's what I think it is, it could destroy everything in its path." Emily didn't need to be told twice. "Marco, take us back. Now." But before Marco could respond, the ground beneath them split open again, this time wider, and from within the chasm, an enormous tendril of metallic substance shot upward. It spiraled into the air, an alien structure reaching for the rover like a living thing. Lily screamed, clutching at the side of the rover. "It's coming for us. We have to move." Marco slammed his foot on the accelerator, but the tendril moved faster, curling around the rover in a vicious, otherworldly motion. The metal screeched as it was ensnared, the tendril lifting the rover off the ground with terrifying ease. For a moment, Emily could only watch in horror as the massive alien appendage coiled around the vehicle. The lights inside the rover flickered, and the communication systems went dead. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion as they were lifted off the Martian surface, the tendril pulling them toward the now glowing structure beneath the planet's surface. "We're being pulled in," Marco shouted. "We need to get out, now." But it was too late. The rover was caught, suspended in midair, and the structure's immense gravity seemed to draw them in, pulling them closer to whatever ancient force lay at the heart of Mars. Emily's heart raced as she gripped the edge of her seat. The reality of the situation set in. They were no longer in control. The planet, this place they had come to conquer, had its own will. And now, it was taking them somewhere they couldn't understand. "Everyone out of the rover!" Emily shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She didn't care what the risk was anymore. The rover was going to be destroyed, and they had no choice but to make a break for it. Victor, Lily, and Marco scrambled to unstrap themselves, but the shaking was too violent. The rover was tilted at an unnatural angle, its systems failing as the tendril pulled it deeper into the surface. And then, as if the planet itself were breathing, a deafening roar filled the air. The tendril retracted, and the rover was cast aside, tumbling violently to the ground, its engine sputtering and dying. "Run!" Emily screamed. "Run!" They sprinted across the barren landscape, the monolith's glow still illuminating everything around them. The radiation levels were unbearable, and the very air felt electric. Emily's chest heaved with the effort of running, but she didn't dare look back. The thing beneath the surface of Mars was awake now, and they had disturbed it. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just a natural disaster, it was an awakening. And they were at the center of it. The crew reached the edge of the base just as the ground trembled once more. The planet, or whatever force resided within it, was no longer a mystery. It was alive. And it had just made its presence known. As Emily ducked inside the airlock, she glanced back at the horizon. The sky was dark, the ground was cracked open, and the air was thick with energy. The mission had gone from exploration to survival in the blink of an eye. Mars wasn't just a planet anymore. It was a warning. And the crew had just opened the door to something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. The base was chaos. Red lights flashed, alarms blared, and the crew moved in frantic disarray, scrambling to process the magnitude of the disaster unfolding outside. Emily's mind raced. The moment they had discovered the metallic fragments in the Martian soil, they had unknowingly triggered something ancient, something powerful. Now, with Mars' surface literally cracking open, they were fighting to survive. Inside the command center, Emily could hear her heart pounding as she rushed through the narrow corridors, the sounds of distant explosions echoing in the airlock. Marco, Victor, and Lily were close behind, each of them looking as shaken as she felt. "We need to get to the escape pods," Emily said, her voice sharp and commanding. The decision was already made. There was no other way out. The base wasn't going to hold. The shaking of the ground was too intense, the radiation levels climbing steadily. It was clear, Mars was alive, and it wasn't about to let them leave in one piece. Victor, still struggling to stay calm, muttered, "But how are we supposed to get off the planet? The systems are failing, and the pods." "They'll work," Emily interrupted. "They have to." Lily's face was pale, her hands trembling. She wasn't one to show fear, but even she couldn't hide the terror in her eyes. "I didn't sign up for this. We came here to explore, not to escape a waking monster." "It's not a monster," Emily said, though her own voice faltered slightly. "It's something else. Something ancient. We've uncovered something the planet has been hiding for eons." Lily nodded, but it was clear she didn't fully understand, or perhaps, didn't want to understand. "Whatever it is, it's not friendly. We need to get off this planet before we all become a part of its history." The team reached the airlock, and as Emily punched in the final code, she couldn't shake the image of the massive monolith rising from the surface, the tendrils of alien metal reaching for the rover, their only means of escape. It was as if the planet had become sentient, conscious of their presence, and had decided it was time for them to leave. The airlock hissed open, and the team stumbled into the escape pods, each of them fighting to keep their composure. They strapped themselves into their seats, the weight of their situation settling in. Emily's hands shook as she worked to initiate the launch sequence. The pod systems hummed to life, and she could feel the subtle vibrations of the engines as they prepared to lift off from the surface of Mars. But there was something different about this launch. Something that felt like a reckoning. Mars wasn't just a lifeless world anymore, it was a living entity, and they had disturbed it. Launch sequence initiated, the computer's calm, robotic voice interrupted her thoughts. T-30 seconds. Emily took a deep breath and stared at the control panel. The countdown had begun, but in the back of her mind, she could still hear the sound of that distant, rumbling roar, the alien monolith's call, like a warning. A shiver ran down her spine. Would they make it off this planet alive? Or was this just the beginning of something far more terrifying? "Everyone ready?" Emily asked, her voice steady but tight. "I'm not sure we can ever be ready for this," Marco muttered, his voice low as he glanced over his shoulder. "We're not just escaping Mars, we're escaping something far worse." The pod lifted off the ground, slowly at first, then with increasing speed as the boosters fired. The crew was pressed back into their seats, the harsh G-force pushing them into their harnesses. Outside the porthole, the desolate surface of Mars receded, the cracks in the planet's surface still glowing faintly, a testament to the alien force they had uncovered. Emily didn't dare look back. The air outside was thick with energy, and the once stable ground they had known had morphed into a volatile, unpredictable force. As the pod ascended, the communications systems flickered to life, and a voice, crisp and authoritative, came through. It was Mission Control back on Earth. "Emily, can you hear us?" She exhaled sharply. "I hear you. We're alive, but not for long. Mars is alive, and we need to get back to Earth. The situation has escalated beyond anything we can comprehend." There was a pause, and then the voice responded. "Understood. We've been monitoring your situation, but the priority now is to bring you home. We'll be in contact with you shortly." The tension in the pod was unbearable. Every minute felt like an eternity, the pressure of the unknown pressing in on them from all sides. But they were free from the surface. For now. As the pod continued its ascent into space, Emily let out a long, shaky breath, her hands gripping the armrests. She glanced around at the faces of her team, each of them looking exhausted, emotionally drained, and yet relieved. "We made it," Marco said, his voice thick with exhaustion. "We're leaving Mars behind. "We're not leaving it behind," Emily replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Mars will always be there, waiting. We've just uncovered something that's been hidden for millions of years. And I don't think we'll ever truly escape it." Victor turned to her, his expression grim. "You're right. Whatever that thing was, it's not done with us. We may have escaped Mars, but it's not over. It's just the beginning." Emily nodded. She knew he was right. They had survived the initial catastrophe, but the questions, lingered in her mind. What was the force that lay beneath Mars? Was it truly alien in origin or something else entirely? And why had it awakened now, just as they had started to unlock Mars' secrets? The answers would come in time. She knew that. But for now, as the pod continued its journey back to Earth, Emily allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The struggle to survive was over. But the war for answers, for understanding, was only just beginning. "Stay alert," Emily said, her voice taking on a new resolve. "We're going to have a lot of questions when we get back. But first, we need to make sure we make it home." The stars outside the window stretched out like pinpricks of light in the vast expanse of space. The crew had escaped the horrors of Mars, but deep down, they knew that this was just the first chapter of a much larger story. The red planet had secrets, and now they were part of that mystery. And somewhere out there, waiting, was a truth far bigger than any of them could possibly comprehend. Mars had awakened. And the future had just begun. The journey back to Earth felt like an eternity. The sterile environment of the escape pod was quiet except for the occasional hum of the engines and the faint beeping of systems that monitored their progress. For a few moments, Emily allowed herself to close her eyes, trying to push away the memories of what had happened on Mars. But the image of the monolith, the glowing tendrils, and the ground splitting open, those images would stay with her forever. Even as the stars outside the pod seemed calm, the crew remained uneasy. They had escaped, yes, but what they had encountered on Mars was something they couldn't fully understand. And worse, the monolith-like structure, the alien force, was still on Mars, still there, waiting, as if watching them. "We're almost there," Marco's voice broke through Emily's thoughts. "Earth's gravity's starting to pull us in. Time to prepare for re-entry." Victor, who had been staring at the data on his screen, finally spoke up. "You know, I still can't shake the feeling that we're not just running from Mars. We're running from something that's still alive out there." Lily nodded from across the pod, her face tired, but her eyes wide with concern. "I don't think we fully grasp what we've unleashed. That thing under Mars. Whatever it is, it's more than we can handle. And now it's waiting for us to come back. It wasn't just some ancient relic, it's alive, and it knows we're here." Emily looked at each of them in turn. The stress was showing on all their faces, the wear and tear of the past weeks showing in their expressions. They had seen Mars in ways that no one had ever dreamed of, and now they had to face the reality that they were the first to awaken something that should have stayed buried forever. "Do you think it followed us?" Marco asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know," Emily replied, her brow furrowed. "But whatever it is, it's not done with us yet. We've only just scratched the surface. And Earth. Earth is going to want answers. We can't let them know everything just yet. The truth might be too much for them." The tension was palpable. They had crossed a line, and now the truth was bigger than any of them could comprehend. As the pod continued its descent toward Earth, the gravity of their situation weighed heavier on them. No matter how much they tried to prepare for the questions that awaited them, they all knew deep down that they didn't have the answers. The re-entry into Earth's atmosphere was a rough one. The heat shield of the pod glowed bright red as the pod spiraled downward, the intense friction threatening to burn them alive. Emily's hands gripped the armrests, her breath shallow as the G-forces pushed down on them. "Brace for impact," Marco shouted, and Emily felt herself pressed back into her seat. The pod jolted hard as it broke through the atmosphere, and everything inside rattled violently. The crew members were silent now, their faces tense, eyes wide. There was no time for anything but survival. For a moment, all Emily could do was hold her breath, praying that the pod systems would hold up just long enough to get them to safety. With a final jolt, the pod crashed onto Earth's surface, skidding across the terrain before coming to a full stop. The crew was tossed forward, their bodies jerking against the restraints. The silence that followed was deafening, and Emily's ears rang as the dust settled inside the pod. "Is everyone okay?" Emily asked, her voice shaky, but relieved. Lily was the first to unstrap herself, rubbing her neck. "Yeah, I think we're fine." But that was way too close. Victor had already started running diagnostic checks on the pod systems. "The pod's intact. We made it." Marco exhaled slowly, looking out the small porthole. "It's over, right? We're home." But Emily didn't share Marco's optimism. As the crew disembarked from the escape pod and stepped into the grassy field that surrounded their landing site, she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't truly safe. The landscape was beautiful, peaceful even, but it felt wrong, like the calm before the storm. They were met by a team of Earth-based scientists and military personnel, all gathered to examine the crew's return. They had been waiting, monitoring the space mission from Earth for weeks, and now, with the crew safely back on their home planet, the questions began. "Welcome home," a man in a crisp military uniform said, offering a handshake to Emily. "You've been through a lot. The whole world is waiting for you to tell us what happened." "Thank you," Emily replied, her voice cool but strained. "But first, we need to make sure the mission data is secure." The team ushered them into a secure facility, and the moment they were inside, the questions began. "Why did the rover fail to return to base?" one of the scientists asked, his voice eager and sharp. "What did you discover under the surface?" another inquired. Emily took a deep breath. The press was waiting outside, the media eager to know everything. But how could she explain what they had encountered? How could she put into words the alien presence they had uncovered on Mars, the thing that had changed everything? "Let's sit down first," she said, motioning toward a table in the corner of the room. She needed time to think, to gather her thoughts. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about what Mars had unleashed, and the fact that Earth was now in the crosshairs. The hours that followed were a blur. Emily was forced to give her account, answering questions she wasn't prepared for. She explained the details of the mission, the fragments they found, the tremors, and the alien force they had awakened. But even as she spoke, she knew she wasn't giving them the full picture. She couldn't. What would the world say when they learned the truth? That Mars was alive. That they had awakened something powerful and dangerous. That they had been the first to tap into a force beyond their comprehension. She didn't want to think about the consequences. Meanwhile, Marco and Victor worked tirelessly with the other scientists to decrypt the data from their mission. Lily, on the other hand, seemed distant, her mind clearly still on the monolith beneath Mars. Emily could see that her teammate was haunted by what they had uncovered, and she couldn't blame her. "We need to prepare," Emily said later that night, as they sat in their temporary quarters. "Earth doesn't know what it's dealing with. We need to be ready. Whatever that thing was on Mars, it hasn't stopped watching us. And it's going to want more." Lily, exhausted but resolute, nodded. "You're right. It's just the beginning." Victor's face was grave. "We don't know how much time we have. Mars didn't just wake up for us. We triggered something. And I don't think it's done yet." As the crew prepared for the next steps, they couldn't shake the feeling that the journey wasn't over. Mars had awakened, and with it, a future no one was ready for. The world was watching. The air was thick with tension in the secure room where Emily and her crew sat, facing the media frenzy that had erupted the moment their escape pod had touched down. Every news outlet, every government agency, every scientific institution wanted a piece of them. They were the first humans to set foot on Mars, and now, they were the first to uncover something that had the potential to change the course of human history. Emily adjusted her chair, her hands resting firmly on the table in front of her, trying to steady her nerves. The mission had already shaken the very foundation of space exploration, but now, every interview, every briefing, every comment she made carried the weight of the world's expectations. The military officials, the scientists, and the journalists had gathered in the expansive conference room. Outside the glass walls, the public had been glued to their screens, waiting for any hint, any fragment of information about what the crew had encountered on Mars. "You're aware that the whole world is waiting for you to explain what happened, right?" an anxious reporter asked, holding up a microphone. "What exactly did you find on Mars?" Emily's eyes flickered toward Marco, Victor, and Lily. They all wore similar expressions of caution. This wasn't just a simple debrief anymore. They were on the verge of revealing something that could ignite global panic. "We found traces of something beneath the surface," Emily began, her voice steady but tinged with the gravity of the situation. "It was unlike anything we've ever encountered. Fragments of metal, structures that didn't match any known terrestrial designs. Something ancient, something alien." The room went quiet. The tension was palpable, and Emily could feel it pressing in from all sides. She could see the journalists' eyes widen, could hear the collective gasps of disbelief. For the first time, she realized how much the public's imagination had been captivated by Mars, and how little they understood the full implications of what they had discovered. "What did you mean by alien?" another reporter asked, his voice shaky. "Are we talking about extraterrestrial life? Technology from another world?" Emily hesitated for a moment, considering her words carefully. "Yes and no. What we encountered was not life, per se, but it was something that felt alive. A kind of energy, alive, but ancient. We have no concrete answers yet, and we might never have all the answers. But whatever it was, it had been there for eons, dormant beneath the Martian surface." Victor, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. "We don't know if it was ever truly dead. The way the planet trembled, the way the surface cracked open as we approached, it was as if Mars itself was reacting to our presence. We triggered something, and the planet is not the same as it was before." Lily added, her voice quiet but urgent, "We've unleashed something that Mars has kept hidden for centuries. It's not just a relic, it's part of the planet. Whatever we woke up is powerful. And it's not going to let us forget we disturbed it." The weight of Lily's words hung in the air, and Emily could feel the unease ripple through the room. The public was grasping the enormity of what they had uncovered. But Emily knew, she knew that the full extent of the discovery was still too dangerous to reveal. The questions kept coming, faster and more pressing. What happens now? Can we go back to Mars? How do we protect Earth from whatever it is you discovered? "I don't know the answers to most of those questions," Emily said, her voice firm now. "But we can't ignore that what we've discovered has implications far beyond what we can currently grasp. We need time. Time to study it, to understand what we've unleashed before it's too late." Marco's face was grim. "What we encountered isn't just confined to Mars. If we're not careful, the effects of what we've triggered could reach us here. Earth may not be safe." The room fell into uneasy silence. Emily could hear the nervous murmur of the press outside the walls of the conference room. The world's eyes were now on them, but instead of feeling like heroes, they felt like prisoners of their own discovery. Back in the secure facility, the team gathered in a small conference room, trying to process everything they had just shared with the world. The weight of their words had settled into their minds, and each of them felt the invisible chains that now bound them to a future that was increasingly uncertain. "I don't think we can contain this much longer," Victor said, his voice low. "The way Mars responded when we approached, that wasn't just a coincidence. Whatever is down there is alive. And it won't stay on Mars." Emily nodded slowly. "We've opened Pandora's box, Victor. And it's not going to stay closed. The truth is, Mars isn't just a planet anymore, it's a living, breathing entity with a history we can't even begin to understand. Lily stood by the window, gazing out at the distant skyline of the city. I've been thinking about what we woke up, and it's not just Mars that's at risk. The energy we disturbed, it could travel. It could reach Earth. And if it does, she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Emily looked around at her crew, each of them clearly wrestling with the enormity of the situation. The questions were endless. The unknowns, infinite. But they all knew one thing for certain, their journey wasn't over. I don't care what it takes, Emily said, her voice firm. We need to go back. We need to find out what that thing is, how to control it, and what it means for humanity. If we don't, Earth could be next. Marco met her gaze. You really think we can go back? I don't know. But if we don't try, we'll never know how to stop it. The next few weeks were a blur. The world had gone into a frenzy. Governments scrambled to secure information, the public demanded transparency, and scientists from all over the world began clamoring for access to the mission's data. Emily's team became more isolated, forced to navigate the delicate line between transparency and caution. Emily's thoughts kept returning to Mars, the monolith, the ancient energy, the way the planet itself had reacted. It wasn't just the planet's surface that had been disturbed, it was something deeper, more insidious. Whatever had been buried beneath Mars wasn't a dormant relic. It was something far more dangerous. The world may have been content to believe that Mars was just a barren wasteland, a curiosity to explore. But Mars was so much more. And Emily knew, deep down, that the real journey was just beginning. As the team worked tirelessly to analyze the data they had brought back with them, Emily's resolve hardened. They couldn't stay on Earth. They had to go back. Because the true enemy, whatever it was waiting for them, lurking beneath the surface of Mars, biding its time. Prepare for the next mission, Emily said one evening, her eyes filled with determination. We're going back. And this time, we're going to finish what we started. The weight of the world pressed heavily on Emily's shoulders. The press conference had ended, and now the room, once filled with a cacophony of reporters and officials, had fallen silent. The crew had been sequestered in their private quarters, and the world had finally been given a glimpse of the unknown they'd uncovered on Mars. But that glimpse wasn't enough. The world wanted more. Emily walked slowly across the room, the cool surface of the glass wall offering a view of the night sky. She looked up at the stars, as if searching for answers. They had already been back for weeks, yet the feeling of unease, of being watched, never left her. The energy they had awakened beneath Mars had been more than just a scientific breakthrough, it had been a warning. They had been right to flee, but now, there was no escaping the truth, they had to return. Victor sat at a table nearby, scrolling through the data they had recovered. His brow furrowed as he absorbed each line of code, every fragment of data. He had always been the analytical one, the pragmatist who believed in facts and numbers. But even he couldn't deny the growing sense of dread that accompanied their findings. Emily, he said without looking up. I think we're missing something crucial. There's a pattern in the data that doesn't make sense. It's like Mars is, trying to communicate with us. But I don't know how. Emily turned to him, her expression serious. What are you talking about? Victor finally looked up, his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and fear. It's subtle, but it's there. There's a frequency, something buried in the seismic readings we recorded during the tremors. It's like a signal, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Lily, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, jumped to her feet. A heartbeat? You think Mars is alive? Victor shrugged. I don't know, but it's possible. The planet reacted to our presence in a way that no one could have predicted. And now, this data, it's almost like the planet itself is conscious. Emily's stomach turned. The implications were chilling. If Mars was somehow alive, if the planet was sentient in some way, then they had woken something far more dangerous than just an ancient alien artifact. They had disturbed the very heartbeat of the planet. And what does that mean for Earth? Marco asked, his voice filled with concern. If Mars is awake and aware, what happens when it calls for us again? Lily's voice was quiet but resolute. If Mars is conscious, then it's not just waiting for us to return. It's calling us back. It wants us to finish what we started. Emily stood at the center of the room, the realization settling in like a cold weight. We have to go back. We have to find out what it wants, before it comes for us. The decision to return to Mars wasn't made lightly. It wasn't just a matter of curiosity anymore, it was a matter of survival. Earth was unprepared for what they had uncovered. And worse, the longer they waited, the more the planet's secrets seemed to pulse in the background, growing more urgent with each passing day. The space agency had initially hesitated to allow a return mission. The danger was too high, the risk too great. But Emily and her team were relentless, their arguments compelling. They weren't just scientists now, they were humanity's last hope for understanding the threat that Mars posed. And so, after weeks of planning and recalibrating their mission parameters, the team was given a green light for a second journey. Preparations were intense. The crew underwent rigorous physical and psychological evaluations, ensuring they were in peak condition for the journey ahead. Meanwhile, the world's eyes remained trained on them, their every move scrutinized, analyzed, and dissected. They were no longer just explorers, they were the vanguard of an uncertain future. On launch day, the air was thick with anticipation. The massive rocket stood on the launch pad, a towering symbol of human ambition and desperation. Emily stood among the crew, watching the countdown clock tick down. She could feel the electricity in the air, the hum of energy that came with the enormity of what they were about to undertake. She turned to her team, their faces as tense as her own. "Are we ready for this?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. Victor nodded, his eyes hard. "We don't have a choice. If we don't go back, we may never get another chance." Lily clenched her fists. "Whatever it is on Mars, we need to understand it before it reaches us. We've already awakened it once. If we don't finish what we started, the consequences will be catastrophic." Marco smiled, though it was a grim smile. "At least this time, we'll know what we're walking into. Hopefully." Emily nodded, though a small part of her wasn't so sure. They had no idea what they were walking into, and the stakes had never been higher. The countdown reached its final seconds, and the crew boarded the shuttle, settling into their seats. As the engines roared to life and the spacecraft lifted off the ground, Emily felt her heart race. They were leaving Earth behind again, this time with more questions than answers. The shuttle broke through the atmosphere, and as the blue skies of Earth faded into the cold emptiness of space, Emily's mind wandered back to Mars. To the heartbeat. To the signal. What was it Mars was trying to tell them? The journey to Mars felt like an eternity. The crew spent their time preparing for what awaited them, studying the data they had collected, and strategizing about how to approach the next phase of their mission. But even as they trained and planned, none of them could shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something far larger than themselves. It wasn't just a mission to explore, it was a mission to face whatever Mars had become. When the spacecraft finally entered Mars' orbit, the mood in the cabin shifted. The excitement and fear from Earth had given way to a quiet, almost oppressive anticipation. The planet loomed ahead of them, its red surface dotted with the remnants of ancient dust storms and craters that told stories of a time long past. But it was what lay beneath the surface that truly terrified them. "We're approaching the landing site," Marco said, his voice calm but strained. "Ready, everyone?" "Ready as we'll ever be," Emily replied, her voice steady but her mind racing. The descent was smooth, almost too smooth. As the shuttle touched down on the red dust of Mars, Emily's heart beat faster. It was time to face whatever Mars had become. It was time to confront the unknown. The airlock hissed as the doors opened, and the team stepped out onto the Martian surface. The gravity was different, lighter, but the silence that enveloped them was heavy. It felt as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to take the next step. They gathered their equipment and began their trek toward the excavation site, the place where they had first encountered the monolith-like structure. As they neared the location, Emily's unease deepened. The ground beneath them was cracked, like an open wound in the planet's surface. And in the distance, she could swear she saw something moving, just a flicker, just a hint of motion. Something was watching them. But they couldn't turn back now. With each step, they moved closer to the truth. Whatever Mars had to offer, they would face it. Together. The Martian winds whispered across the barren landscape as Emily and her team made their way toward the excavation site, where the unsettling tremors had originated. The silence of Mars was unlike anything they had experienced before. It wasn't just the absence of sound but the stillness of the planet itself, a stillness that felt both ancient and alive. The dust from the landing site still hung in the air, slowly settling over the rocky surface. Mars stretched out before them, an endless horizon of red, with jagged peaks and deep canyons carved by the passage of time. The planet looked lifeless, yet Emily felt an inexplicable sense of being watched. They weren't alone. "I can feel it," Lily muttered, her voice barely audible above the whisper of their breath inside their helmets. "It's like the ground is alive, waiting." Emily glanced at her crew, noting the tension in their posture, the way they all moved with the quiet caution of people who understood they were about to confront something far beyond their comprehension. They reached the site where they had made their initial discovery, the vast, circular depression in the ground where the monolith had been partially buried. The metal fragments they had unearthed weeks ago now lay scattered, and the strange, alien structure was more pronounced than before. The patterns that had once seemed random now appeared deliberate, etched deep into the rock by forces beyond their understanding. But there was something different about it now. The ground surrounding the structure had shifted. The cracks in the surface were wider, more pronounced. The air felt charged, as though the planet itself was responding to their presence. Emily could feel a subtle vibration underfoot, like a heartbeat just beneath the surface, in perfect time with the strange signal Victor had detected before. Her heart raced as she realized what it meant. Mars was reacting to them, waiting for them. "We need to investigate further," Victor said, his voice cutting through the tension. He adjusted his helmet and checked his equipment. "This is no longer just a relic or a structure, it's part of the planet. It's connected." Marco set his jaw and looked toward the others. "We're not leaving until we know what's causing this." The team spread out, each of them carefully examining the area, making notes, checking the data from their instruments. The surface beneath them seemed to pulse with a strange energy that hummed in the air, almost too faint to detect but undeniable all the same. Lily crouched down near a set of peculiar markings that seemed to glow faintly in the dim Martian sunlight. "Look at this," she said, touching the markings gently. "These weren't here before. The symbols, they're changing. It's like the planet is rewriting itself." Emily moved closer, her heart pounding. The symbols were shifting, as though the Martian surface was reacting to their presence, rewriting its own history in real time. The mystery was growing deeper with every second. "This isn't just about us, is it?" Lily continued. "We're not just uncovering ancient history. We're interfering with something that's been dormant for eons." The realization hit Emily hard. Mars wasn't just a barren wasteland. It had been hiding something, alive, waiting, and now awake. As the team continued to inspect the site, a low rumble reverberated through the ground beneath them. At first, they thought it was just another tremor, another aftershock from their initial excavation. But this was different. It was louder. Stronger. And then, the earth shifted. A massive crack split the ground before them, widening rapidly, like the planet itself was opening its mouth to swallow them whole. Emily barely had time to react before the ground below them gave way. The team scrambled, trying to move back, but it was too late. The crack split open wider, revealing something ancient and massive, beneath the surface. A blinding light emanated from the fissure, so bright it made their suit sensors glitch, forcing them to shield their eyes. Then, the ground stopped shaking. The light dimmed. And from the chasm emerged a massive, pulsating shape, a structure, one that had been buried, dormant, and now was rising as if drawn to their very presence. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the form taking shape before her. It was an object, but it wasn't like anything they had ever seen. It was colossal, hovering slightly above the ground, its surface rippling with an otherworldly energy. The structure seemed to shift and grow, like an organic being, its edges flickering with energy. "It's alive," Victor whispered. "This thing, it's a living organism." Lily moved closer, her voice trembling. "What the hell is this? Some kind of Martian technology?" "I don't think it's technology," Emily said quietly, her eyes glued to the glowing, pulsating object. "I think it's something far older. It's part of Mars. It's alive." The object seemed to pulse in time with the strange energy that had been emanating from the planet, like a heart beating in sync with the land itself. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate again, and this time, Emily could hear something, low, almost imperceptible. It was a sound. A hum. A call. It was calling to them. Marco grabbed Emily's arm, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Emily, we need to leave. This is way beyond us." But Emily didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the structure, on the way it seemed to reach out toward them. It wasn't threatening, not in the way they expected. It felt, almost welcoming. It was as if the planet itself had been waiting for them to unlock its deepest secrets. And then, as if sensing her thoughts, the structure pulsed one final time, and a voice, clear, resonating, and impossible to ignore, echoed through their helmets. "You have awakened the heart of Mars." Emily's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The air around them felt thick with the weight of those words. The heart of Mars. What did it mean? Was this the thing that had been waiting beneath the surface for eons? Was this the key to understanding everything? Before anyone could speak, the voice continued, its tone calm, almost soothing, but there was an underlying power to it. "Now, you must decide. Will you learn? Will you help us?" The question hung in the air, and Emily realized with a growing sense of dread that the choice was now in their hands. Mars wasn't just a lifeless planet. It was a being with thoughts, intentions, and perhaps even its own desires. And whatever Mars wanted, they were about to find out. Whether they were ready or not. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily turned slowly toward her team, each of them looking as stunned as she felt. The reality of their situation was rapidly escalating. This wasn't just an expedition. This was an encounter with something beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Mars was alive. And it was asking for their help. The hum of the Martian atmosphere felt different now, charged with something unnatural, something profoundly alien. The team stood frozen, staring at the towering structure that had emerged from the planet's depths. Its surface shimmered with iridescent waves of energy, as if it were breathing, its pulse in sync with the vibrations of the ground beneath their feet. Emily's thoughts raced. 1,000 questions filled her mind, none of them answered. What did Mars want from them? What had they awakened? And, most pressing of all, what was the cost of their involvement? The voice that had echoed inside their helmets, still resonated in her mind, "Will you help us?" The very air around them seemed to thicken, and it was as if the planet itself was waiting for their response. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her helmet's communication device. "Victor," she whispered, her voice shaking despite her efforts to remain calm. "Do you understand what's happening?" Victor, standing beside her, looked as confused as she felt. He stared at the object, his mind clearly spinning. His eyes were wide, his expression strained. "No, Emily. I don't understand it. This isn't just about technology or science. It's something far beyond that. It's asking for something from us. Lily's voice crackled through the comms, cutting through the tension. Emily, what do we do? What are we supposed to do? We can't just leave, can we? I mean, what if we don't help it? What if this thing, what if Mars, decides to retaliate? The thought sent a shiver down Emily's spine. She turned her gaze to the horizon, the barren red expanse of Mars stretching endlessly before them. If Mars was alive, if this entity beneath their feet had the power to reach out to them with such an overwhelming force, what would happen if they refused? Marco stepped forward, his jaw clenched. We've been standing here, debating the impossible, but I think it's clear, we have to engage. The planet's not going to just sit back. If it's asking for our help, then we need to figure out what it wants. It's the only way forward. The decision hung in the air like a heavy fog. Emily looked at each of her team members. She could see the fear in their eyes, fear not just of the unknown, but of the responsibility that came with the decision they were about to make. She felt it too. Every instinct told her to run, to get back to the safety of their shuttle, and leave Mars behind. But a part of her, an undeniable, deep-seated pull, told her that they couldn't. They couldn't turn back. Not now. It's asking for help, Emily murmured, her eyes flickering back to the structure that had risen from the depths. Whatever this is, whatever it represents, we need to learn from it. We can't ignore it. Not when it's directly reaching out to us. Victor looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. We've come this far. If we're going to die, we die trying to understand. But we need to make sure we're ready for what it's going to ask of us. This is no longer just about exploration. This is about survival. For all of us. The ground continued to tremble beneath their feet, faint at first, but growing more pronounced with each passing minute. The pulsating structure in front of them seemed to respond to their decision, its energy fluctuating as if acknowledging their choice. The light around it grew brighter, more intense, casting long shadows across the Martian landscape. And then the voice spoke again, louder this time, almost as though it was no longer speaking through their helmets but directly into their minds. You are the ones who will awaken the heart of Mars. You must choose, the path of knowledge or the path of power. Only one will be left when you walk away. Choose wisely. Emily's heart skipped a beat. The choice was being made for them now. There was no escaping it. What does that mean? Marco asked, his voice strained. Knowledge or power? The ground vibrated more violently, and the air seemed to shimmer with energy. It was as if Mars itself was preparing for something monumental. Emily took a deep breath, her mind swirling with fear, confusion, and awe. This was it. The moment of truth. We need to understand both, Emily said, her voice gaining strength as the weight of their responsibility began to settle. We need to understand the full scope of what's going on here, not just what Mars wants from us, but what it means for Earth. We can't just choose one over the other. If we fail to comprehend both, we'll never truly know what we've awakened. Victor hesitated, his eyes still locked on the swirling mass before them. And if we fail? What happens then? Emily didn't have an answer. She wished she did. But in her heart, she knew that if they didn't act now, the consequences would be catastrophic. Whether they helped Mars or not, they had already made an irreversible decision by coming here. They couldn't afford to ignore the consequences of that. Suddenly, the air around them began to shimmer, like heat rising off pavement, distorting the light. And then, it happened. A massive, blinding beam shot upward from the structure, streaking toward the heavens. The ground shook violently as the beam tore through the Martian atmosphere, its power and force unlike anything they had ever experienced. Emily shielded her eyes, feeling the intense pull of the energy radiating from the structure. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the beam disappeared. The ground stopped shaking. Silence fell. But this silence was different. It was profound. You have chosen, the voice said, now calm, almost serene. Mars will begin its awakening. But know this, the path you have chosen will not come without sacrifice. Knowledge and power come at a cost. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She looked at her team, their faces pale, eyes wide with shock. What did we just do? Marco whispered, his voice barely audible. They had made a choice. And now, they would have to live with the consequences. Whatever Mars was awakening, whatever power and knowledge it held, it would shape the future of humanity, perhaps for the better, perhaps for the worse. The team stood in the now still Martian landscape, the weight of their decision settling heavily upon them. They had chosen to confront the heart of Mars. They had chosen to understand it. But they had no idea what lay ahead. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, as Emily's mind raced. The future of humanity was in their hands. And there was no turning back. The Martian sky was still, a vast canvas of muted red and ochre, stretching beyond the horizon. Yet, beneath that barren, silent exterior, something had shifted. Mars had awakened. And Emily felt it in every fiber of her being, the subtle hum in the air, the faint tremor underfoot. The planet had responded to their decision. They had made their choice, and now, there was no going back. The team gathered in a circle around the towering structure, their faces still hidden behind the reflective visors of their helmets, but their eyes spoke volumes, wide with disbelief, tinged with fear, and yet filled with a strange sense of awe. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. They had just initiated something profound, something world-altering. What could possibly follow this? Emily, still holding her breath, took a slow step forward, breaking the silence that had settled over them like a weight. She felt the atmosphere around her change. The vibrations had subsided, but the air was thick with a palpable energy that had never been there before. Mars, in its quiet, mysterious way, had invited them into its secrets. The planet had become more than just a distant world, it was now part of their lives. Its fate was tied to theirs. What have we unleashed? She couldn't help but wonder. Her thoughts raced as she turned to look at her team. Lily's hand rested on her comms equipment, the glow of her suit reflecting off her visor. Marco and Victor exchanged a look, both of them trying to process what they had just experienced. It was clear, they were all still reeling from the intensity of the moment. The voice, the beam of light, the decision they had made, it was too much to fully comprehend. But in the silence, there was a new weight to the air. It was a feeling of inevitability, as though the choice they'd made was no longer just their own. The planet had claimed them as its own. And now, they had to live with whatever came next. The structure in front of them seemed to pulse in time with their own hearts, its glowing energy flickering with life. The shimmering surface began to change shape once again. The very air seemed to shimmer and ripple with a force that was beyond natural. It was as if the structure was, breathing, alive, responding to their presence. And then, without warning, the voice returned. You have awoken us, it intoned, its tone softer now, almost tender. The heart of Mars is no longer dormant. It has stirred, and with it, so too has the future of your world. The time of isolation is over. The time of connection begins now. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the words echoed in her mind. The heart of Mars. She'd heard those words before, but now they felt heavier, laden with meaning that only now, in this moment, she truly understood. The connection wasn't just between Mars and their team. It was between Mars and Earth, the two worlds now bound by the threads of fate. Lily spoke first, her voice filled with a sense of wonder. You mean, this is bigger than us? It's about Earth too? Yes, the voice responded. The heart of Mars is part of something greater. It has always been. It is the bridge between worlds, between life and knowledge. Your presence has unlocked the path forward. Victor took a step forward, his face filled with quiet determination. "What do you want from us?" he asked. "What is it that you need?" The structure's glow intensified, but instead of feeling overwhelming, it now felt warm, reassuring. "We need to learn. Together. The time has come for the knowledge of Mars to be shared with your world. The time for isolation, for secrets buried beneath the surface, has ended. Your species is ready." Marco, ever the pragmatist, raised an eyebrow. "Ready? For what? What is it you're asking of us?" The voice didn't answer immediately. Instead, the shimmering surface of the structure seemed to split open, revealing a swirling, luminous core. It was a portal, a gateway to something beyond their understanding. "We have shown you the way. We ask you to walk through it. To understand what has been kept hidden from you for so long. But be warned, the knowledge you seek comes with a price. The future will not be as it was before. It will be changed." The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. Emily glanced at her team. There was no mistaking the weight of the decision that lay before them. If they stepped into that gateway, if they chose to embrace the knowledge Mars was offering, there was no telling what they would uncover. The future of humanity, of Earth, was at stake. "What price?" Emily asked, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. "What will we lose?" "That which binds you to the old world," the voice responded. "The old ways, the old beliefs. The new path will not be easy. You must choose, and in choosing, you will leave behind the world as you know it." Lily spoke up, her voice trembling with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "You mean, we're about to change everything? For everyone? Forever?" "Yes," the voice answered. "The path you choose will ripple through time, through space. You will not return the same. But you will be part of something greater." A long silence followed as the team processed the magnitude of what was unfolding before them. Emily's heart raced. The fear, the uncertainty, the excitement, they were all colliding within her. But deep down, she knew they couldn't turn back. The choice was theirs, and the world was about to change. She turned to her team, her eyes filled with the weight of responsibility. "We've come this far," she said quietly. "And there's no going back. We've awakened Mars. We've awakened its heart. Now, we have to walk through the doorway it's opened for us. We have to see what comes next. Together." Victor, Marco, and Lily nodded in unison, their resolve hardening as they stepped closer to the portal. They were ready. They had no idea what awaited them on the other side, but they knew they couldn't turn away now. As Emily took one last look at the red Martian landscape, at the towering structure, at her team, her family, she felt the weight of their decision settle into her bones. There was no going back. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And with that, they stepped forward into the glowing portal, the future of humanity and Mars intertwined forever. For a brief moment, everything was light. As Emily and her team stepped through the pulsing gateway, it was as if reality folded inward. Gravity lost its meaning. Time unraveled. There was no up or down, only the sensation of being everywhere and nowhere at once. Then came the silence. Not the kind they'd grown used to on Mars, but a deeper, more absolute quiet. The kind that preceded creation. When the light faded, they were no longer standing on the rust-colored surface of Mars. They were somewhere else entirely. Emily blinked. The sky above wasn't red, it was black and infinite, studded with shifting constellations that pulsed like veins of starlight. The ground beneath their feet was translucent, glassy, shimmering with what looked like liquid energy. Great crystalline structures rose in the distance, their geometry so precise and alien it hurt to look at for too long. "What is this place?" Lily whispered, her voice reverent, breath fogging the inside of her visor. Victor's voice crackled in their comms. "We've passed through some kind of dimensional rift. This isn't just underground Mars. This is a different plane, another layer of existence." One Mars has kept hidden, maybe even from itself. Marco turned in a slow circle, absorbing the surreal landscape. It's like, we're inside the consciousness of the planet. Emily didn't speak. She was still processing the enormity of what they were witnessing. Every instinct told her this was not just an alien environment, this was a memory, a vault of something ancient and profound. She could feel the sentience around them, watching, waiting. Then the voice returned, clearer than ever before, no longer booming or cryptic. Now it was gentle, intimate. You stand at the intersection of past and possibility. The landscape shifted. The crystalline towers dissolved into light, revealing a series of vast holographic visions suspended in the air like floating history books. One by one, they flickered into view, scenes of a flourishing Martian civilization, tens of thousands of years ago. Towering cities, advanced bioarchitecture, creatures not unlike humans, tall and luminous, working in harmony with nature and technology. Emily gasped. Mars was alive. A civilization. Intelligent life. We were, the voice answered. We reached further than your species yet dreams. But like all who rise too high, we fell. Another vision emerged. A planet-wide cataclysm. Solar storms. Environmental collapse. And then, a final, desperate attempt by the Martians to encode their knowledge into the planet itself. Their essence, their memories, bound into the crystalline network that now pulsed beneath the Martian crust. We gave our knowledge to the planet. We became one with it. And we waited, for those who would come not in conquest, but in curiosity. Lily's eyes filled with tears. That's us. Yes, the voice confirmed. You chose to learn, not to dominate. And now, we offer this wisdom to you. Emily took a trembling step forward as a new image materialized, a mirror of Earth, seen from space. It glowed blue and green, vibrant and fragile. Then the image shifted, fires, floods, conflict, famine. The path Earth was on. Your world stands at the same precipice we once faced. The choice is now yours, to evolve beyond the need to conquer, or to repeat the fall. The weight of it all crushed down on her. She looked at Victor, Marco, and Lily. They each wore the same expression, pain, awe, responsibility. So what are you giving us? Emily asked. What does this knowledge actually mean? The air shimmered, and in front of them, a sphere of golden light appeared. Inside it, swirling patterns of code, molecular blueprints, biological systems, energy maps, all compacted into a single, glowing seed. This is the spark. It is knowledge. Technology. Consciousness. A blueprint for healing your world. But it must be nurtured, not exploited. Emily felt her breath catch. It was everything humanity had been searching for. The answer to clean energy, environmental restoration, disease, space travel, a second chance. Marco frowned. And what if Earth isn't ready for it? Then the spark will sleep again, the voice replied. Until someone is. A beat passed. Then the voice spoke directly to Emily, her name echoing in a way that made her feel like the planet itself knew her soul. Emily Sloan, you have been chosen as keeper of the spark. It will reside within your vessel until it is time to awaken on Earth. Protect it. Understand it. Share it, only when humanity is ready. Her hands began to glow as the golden sphere slowly dissolved into her suit's chest panel, sinking with her vitals, embedding itself within her. She staggered. I can feel it. A warmth bloomed inside her. Not painful, but alive. As if something greater had taken root in her body, and her future. Victor approached slowly. Are you okay? She nodded. I'm not just okay. I feel connected. Like I can hear the planet breathing. The spark, it's a living library. Then the world around them began to dissolve. The crystalline terrain faded into vapor, the stars winked out, and the dark sky peeled back to red. They were standing once more on the surface of Mars, near the excavation site. The structure was gone. No beam. No rift. Just stillness. Silence. Lily exhaled shakily. Did that just happen? Emily looked at her, a slow, solemn nod. Yes. All of it. We're going home. But not as the people we were. Victor scanned the surroundings. And Earth, it won't be ready for this. Not yet. No, Emily said. But one day it will be. And when it is, we'll be ready. The four of them turned toward their shuttle, silhouetted against the rusty Martian plain. They walked slowly, thoughtfully, as if the weight of 1,000 civilizations rested on their shoulders. Because now, it did. The shuttle lifted off from the surface of Mars, leaving behind the red dust, the silence, and the history buried beneath its crust. Inside the spacecraft, the crew sat in a reverent stillness, no words, no chatter, just the low hum of engines and the occasional flicker of light across their control panels. Emily sat nearest the window, her eyes fixed on the shrinking Martian horizon. It looked peaceful from here. Deceptively so. No trace remained of the alien structure, the glowing portal, or the voice that had spoken to them from deep within the planet. But she knew it was all still there. Waiting. Within her suit's chest panel, the spark still pulsed faintly, a soft warmth that now felt like a second heartbeat. It didn't speak, but its presence was constant. It was watching, listening. Trusting her. Victor sat across from her, arms crossed, a faraway look on his face. You feel different, he said after a long silence. It's in your eyes. Emily turned to him slowly. We all feel different. We're not just astronauts anymore, Victor. We're messengers. Marco exhaled sharply. Messengers of what? That humanity is being given a second shot, if we can stop ourselves from blowing it. Lily, adjusting her headset, chimed in. Yeah. That's a big if. Earth isn't exactly known for playing nice with power. Emily nodded. That's why the spark isn't something we can rush into. It's a seed. It has to grow. Carefully. The spacecraft docked with the International Return capsule in low Earth orbit. On board, news of the team's return had already spread like wildfire. The world had watched their mission closely from the beginning, but rumors of their discovery had leaked, vague, unconfirmed chatter about a breakthrough, something far bigger than just soil samples or geological scans. Now, the media frenzy was a tsunami. As Emily walked onto the landing tarmac after re-entry, sunlight hit her face for the first time in nearly a year. The warmth felt foreign. Heavy with memories of everything they'd left behind, and everything they had brought back. A crowd had formed behind the barricades, reporters, scientists, military officials, world leaders. All hungry for answers. But Emily held up a hand. Not yet, she said. We're not ready. You're not ready. Behind her, Victor and the others stood in quiet solidarity. A man stepped forward from the crowd. Clean-cut, in his 40s, with the confident posture of someone who had spent a lot of time behind a podium. His ID badge read, Dr. Julian Carter, Global Science Coalition. He extended his hand. Commander Sloan. We've been waiting. Emily shook it, firm and calm. I know. But this isn't something you can study in a lab. He raised an eyebrow. Then where do we start? Emily looked toward the horizon, where the sky met the ocean in a hazy blur. We start by learning how to listen. To the planet. To each other. To what we're not saying yet. The room was dimly lit, filled with minds from every continent, philosophers, scientists, spiritual leaders, diplomats, and artists. No press. No cameras. Just people chosen for their openness. On a large screen behind Emily played the holographic projections the Martian vault had shown them, images of the advanced civilization that once thrived, and the vision of Earth's future, both its potential salvation, and its possible ruin. Silence followed. Then Emily stepped forward and spoke to the room. "What we saw on Mars wasn't just a message," she began. "It was a mirror. A warning. But more than that, it was an invitation. To change. To evolve." She gestured to the images. "This is the spark. Not a weapon. Not a shortcut to power. But a living network of knowledge, coded into energy, language, biology, and memory. It was entrusted to us. Not to be used, but to be understood." A hand raised in the crowd. "What if the world doesn't listen?" Emily didn't hesitate. "Then the spark stays asleep. And we wait. Until we're ready." The spark hadn't been unleashed, but it had started to bloom. Not through politics. Not through mass production. But through quiet revolutions. Microfarms inspired by ancient Martian irrigation. New energy grids designed on principles from the spark's molecular blueprints. Medtech breakthroughs reversing rare diseases, distributed in silence by grassroots teams. It spread not like fire, but like light, quiet, patient, persistent. People didn't need to know where the knowledge came from. They just needed to feel it. And slowly, the world began to change. What Emily Sloan and her crew discovered on Mars wasn't just the echo of a lost civilization, it was a message across time. A civilization that saw its own end, and sent a warning forward. The spark they brought back was more than alien tech. It was a challenge: can humanity evolve before it's too late? Mars has always represented mystery. But maybe that mystery was never about life on Mars, but life after it. The kind we're still trying to create here on Earth. In the end, this mission wasn't about reaching a planet. It was about reaching ourselves. Emily stood barefoot on the grass. The sky above was clear, stars blinking in quiet symphony. In her hand, a single pulse from the spark, now contained in a small, smooth crystal, glowed softly. She closed her eyes. "We're listening now," she thought. "We're learning." Behind her, her daughter ran across the lawn, laughing. A new generation. A new beginning. And in the heavens above, Mars watched in silence. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?